After 10 years of marriage and funding his restaurant dreams, my husband banned me from his flagship location's grand opening. "You'll embarrass me," he said. I watched from across the street as celebrities arrived. Then I made one phone call. To the mysterious man who owed me a favor. "I don't want you at the opening, Aaron. You'll embarrass me in front of the real guests." The words hit me like a slap across the face, but I just stood there in our kitchen. The same kitchen where I'd spent countless nights helping Steve perfect his signature dishes, where I'd celebrated his first successful pop-up, where I'd held him when the second location almost failed. The irony wasn't lost on me. He was telling me I didn't belong at his grand opening while standing in the space where his dreams had been born. I nodded. I even smiled. But something inside me cracked that night. Something that had been slowly fracturing for years. 10 years. That's how long I'd poured myself into Steve's dream like wine into a bottomless glass. 10 years of believing in a vision that apparently never included me as anything more than a stepping stone. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories of quiet strength and hidden resilience. If you believe that every woman's contributions deserve recognition, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. It started so differently. Back then we were broke college sweethearts sharing ramen noodles and big dreams. Steve worked the night shift at a diner, coming home with burns on his arms and stories about difficult customers. I was juggling 2 jobs. Morning shifts at a coffee shop and evening gigs freelancing graphic design from our cramped studio apartment. We had nothing except each other and this wild idea that Steve could cook his way to something bigger. "One day we'll build something incredible together," he used to whisper on those late nights when exhaustion made everything feel impossible. "You and me, Aaron. We'll show them what real food can be." I believed him. God, how completely I believed him. When Steve's culinary school bills piled up, I took out a student loan in my name. When he needed professional-grade knives, I sold my grandmother's jewelry. When he talked about opening his first pop-up, I cashed in half of my inheritance. Money my parents had left me after the car accident. $25,000 that was supposed to be my safety net became his launch pad. "This is an investment in us," he'd said, kissing my forehead as I signed the bank papers. "Everything I build, we build together." But somewhere between his first successful pop-up and his third location, the we started disappearing. I was a graphic designer then, actually good at it. I had my own clients, my own creative world that existed beyond Steve's kitchen. I designed logos for small businesses, created marketing materials for local nonprofits, even did some work for a regional magazine. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Then Steve's Asian fusion concept took off, and suddenly I became the helper. It happened so gradually that I didn't notice until it was too late. First, he asked me to design his menus, just temporarily, until he could afford a real designer. Then he needed help with bookkeeping because his accountant was too expensive. When his hostess called in sick, I filled in. When his social media manager quit, I took over the Instagram account. "You're so good at this stuff," Steve would say, kissing my cheek as I worked late into the night on his promotional materials. "Why would I pay someone else when I have you?" Each time I said yes, I lost a piece of myself. My client base dwindled as I spent more time on Steve's projects. My portfolio stagnated. My identity slowly merged into his until I couldn't tell where Aaron the designer ended and Aaron the restaurant wife began. The changes in Steve started subtly, like a slow-acting poison. Success has a way of reshaping people and not always for the better. At first it was small things. He stopped asking about my day. He started using words like elevated dining experience and culinary artistry, instead of just talking about food. He began wearing expensive cologne and got his hair styled at a salon instead of letting me trim it in our bathroom. But the real shift came during industry events. Steve used to introduce me as my wife Erin, the brilliant designer who created all our visual branding. Then it became my wife Erin. Then increasingly I simply wasn't introduced at all. "You make things awkward around investors," he explained one night after a particularly uncomfortable cocktail party where I'd spent 2 hours standing alone while he networked. "They want to talk business and when you're there they feel like they have to make small talk." "I can talk business," I protested. "I've been part of this from the beginning." "You're not really in the industry though," he said with a laugh that felt like a dismissal. "It's different when it's your actual profession." The words stung because they weren't entirely wrong. I wasn't a chef or a restaurant owner or a food critic. I was just the woman who'd sacrificed her own career to build his. I started feeling like wallpaper at his events, always there, part of the background but never really seen. Staff members who'd worked at the restaurants for months sometimes seemed surprised to learn Steve was married. Food bloggers who interviewed him never asked about his personal life. I became invisible in plain sight. Then Grace entered our lives like a perfectly dressed tornado. She was everything I wasn't: polished, connected, professionally put together. The wife of one of Steve's major investors, she'd recently launched her own PR firm specializing in hospitality brands. She had platinum blonde hair that never seemed to have a strand out of place, wore designer clothes that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage, and spoke with the kind of confident authority that made everyone in the room lean in to listen. "Steve has incredible potential," she told me at a dinner party, her smile sharp as a knife. "But he needs the right kind of support to really break through to the next level." I should have seen it coming. The private meetings ostensibly about brand strategy. The sudden changes in how Steve dressed, talked, even held himself. The media training sessions that I wasn't invited to observe. The way he started referring to our restaurants as "my concept" instead of "our restaurants." "Grace thinks I need to be more intentional about my public image," Steve explained when I questioned the expensive new wardrobe. "She says successful restaurateurs are personalities first, chefs second." "What about what I think?" I asked. He paused, and in that pause I heard my answer. The worst part wasn't the big moments. It was the small ones. The way he'd correct my stories at dinner parties. The way he'd steer conversations away when people asked about our partnership. The way he'd grown embarrassed of our modest home, our old car, the simple life we'd built together. "You dilute his brand," Grace told me directly at a food and wine festival, her voice matter-of-fact like she was discussing the weather. "Steve needs to appeal to a certain demographic, and having a wife who looks like someone's suburban aunt, it sends the wrong message about his sophistication level." I went home and stared at myself in the mirror for an hour that night. Suburban aunt. Is that what I'd become? When had I stopped seeing myself as anything more than an extension of Steve's ambitions? But the final blow came 3 weeks ago, when Steve announced the grand opening of his flagship location. The restaurant that would cement his reputation as a serious culinary force. 5 years in the making, funded partly by my inheritance, designed using concepts I'd helped develop, staffed with people I'd interviewed and hired. "The guest list is incredibly exclusive," he said, scrolling through his phone at breakfast. "Grace has confirmed some major food influencers, a few local celebrities, and several investors who could fund our expansion." "What time should I be ready?" I asked, already mentally planning what to wear. That's when he looked up at me with something like pity in his eyes. "Actually, Aaron, I think it would be better if you stayed home for this one." The coffee mug slipped from my hands, shattering against the kitchen floor. Neither of us moved to clean it up. "I don't understand," I said quietly. "Look, this is a really important night for my career. Grace has worked incredibly hard to get the right people there, and..." He paused, searching for words that would somehow make this less devastating. "You'll embarrass me in front of the real guests." The real guest. As if I wasn't real. As if 10 years of marriage and sacrifice and love and partnership weren't real enough to earn me a seat at the table I'd helped build. I nodded because I didn't trust my voice. I smiled because I didn't know what else to do. But that night, as I watched Steve practice his opening remarks in the mirror, something fundamental shifted inside me. The woman who had given up everything for someone else's dream was gone. And the woman who remained? She had some very different ideas about what came next. 3 days passed after Steve's crushing words before I picked up my phone. 3 days of moving through our house like a ghost, preparing meals he barely acknowledged, folding laundry that would hang in a closet belonging to a man who saw me as damaged goods. 3 days of staring at my reflection and wondering when I'd become someone so easily discarded. But on that 4th evening, as Steve practiced his opening speech in the living room, gesturing grandly to an imaginary crowd while I sat invisible on the couch behind him, I remembered Cooper. Cooper Henley wasn't just anyone. He was someone I'd saved, though he'd probably argue I'd saved him more than he'd ever saved me. The memory came flooding back as I watched Steve perform for his phantom audience, completely oblivious to my presence. It happened 5 years ago, back when Steve was still running Soul Kitchen. his Korean-Mexican fusion food truck that parked outside the community college on weekdays. I'd been there that Tuesday afternoon helping him prep for the lunch rush when the health department van pulled up. Steve's face had gone white as paper. "Perfect timing," he'd muttered, wiping his sweaty palms on his apron. "Just what we need when we're behind on permit renewals." The inspector who stepped out was a tall, thin man with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He carried himself with the careful precision of someone who took his job seriously. Clipboard clutched against his chest, pen already uncapped, expression neutral but focused. His badge read C. Henley, Environmental Health Specialist. "Good afternoon," he'd said to Steve. "Routine inspection. This shouldn't take long if everything's in order." Steve had nodded nervously, leading him toward the truck service window. I'd stayed back, organizing napkin dispensers and trying to look busy while Cooper, though I didn't know his name yet, began his methodical examination of Steve's setup. Everything had been going smoothly until Cooper opened the refrigeration unit. I watched his face change. The professional mask slipped for just a moment, replaced by something that looked like distress. He gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles turning white. His breathing became shallow, rapid. "Sir?" Steve had asked. "Is everything okay?" Cooper tried to respond, but the words came out strangled. He set down his clipboard with shaking hands, loosened his tie. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead despite the October chill. I recognized the signs immediately. My college roommate had suffered from panic attacks and I'd learned to spot them from across a room. While Steve stood there looking confused and increasingly worried about his inspection, I stepped forward. "Hey," I said softly to Cooper, "you need to sit down." He looked at me with wild, unfocused eyes. I guided him to the plastic chair we kept behind the truck, away from the small crowd of curious students who'd started to gather. "What's your name?" I asked, crouching beside him. "Cooper," he managed between ragged breaths. I can't." Cooper listened to my voice. "You're having a panic attack, but you're safe. Can you feel the chair beneath you?" I kept my tone calm, steady. "Focus on that feeling. The chair is solid. You're sitting. You're breathing." I'd pulled out my phone without him noticing, scrolling through his recent calls until I found one labeled, "Home Janet." His wife answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Henley? This is Aaron. I'm with your husband, Cooper. He's okay, but he's having some kind of episode. We're at the community college food truck area." "Yes, I'll stay with him." Cooper's breathing began to slow as I talked him through simple grounding exercises my roommate had taught me. Count 5 things you can see. 4 things you can touch. 3 things you can hear. 2 things you can smell. 1 thing you can taste. "The students," he whispered after several minutes. "They're watching." "No one's watching anymore," I lied gently. Steve had managed to disperse the small crowd, though he kept glancing over with concern. "Just focus on getting through this." Janet arrived 20 minutes later, a petite woman with kind eyes and graying brown hair. She thanked me profusely while helping Cooper to their car, promising to take him straight to their family doctor. "I don't know how to thank you," Cooper had said before leaving, his voice still shaky but clearer. "You didn't have to do that. Anyone would have done the same thing," I'd replied. He'd shaken his head slowly. "No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have called 911 and walked away. You stayed. You saw me as a person, not just a problem to solve." Steve never did finish that inspection. Cooper had marked it as incomplete and promised to return the following week, which he did, with a clean bill of health for Soul Kitchen and a small potted orchid for me. "Janet grows these," he'd explained, somewhat embarrassed. "I wanted to give you something, but I wasn't sure what would be appropriate." From that day forward, Cooper and I maintained what could only be described as a gentle friendship. Nothing inappropriate or complicated, just 2 human beings who'd connected during a vulnerable moment and chose to honor that connection. Every Christmas, a card arrived in our mailbox. "Season's greetings from Cooper and Janet Henley." Always the same handwriting, always signed the same way. When I sent him a congratulations card after learning he'd been promoted to senior inspector, he'd called to thank me personally. "You probably don't remember me," he'd started. "Of course I remember you," I'd interrupted. How could I forget? The turning point in our friendship came 2 years ago when Cooper's Christmas card arrived with different handwriting. Janet's neat script had been replaced by Cooper's shakier penmanship, and the message was shorter than usual. I'd called him immediately. Janet moved out last month, he'd admitted after some gentle prodding. 28 years of marriage, and she said she couldn't handle my anxiety anymore. Said she felt like she was walking on eggshells, never knowing when I might have another episode. Without thinking, I'd driven to his apartment that weekend with a container of homemade chocolate chip cookies and a handwritten letter. The letter wasn't long, but I'd poured my heart into it. "Dear Cooper," I'd written, "you are so much more than your worst moments. You are kind and thorough and dedicated to keeping people safe. You saw me as a person worth helping when you came back to finish Steve's inspection, even though you could have easily failed us and moved on. Janet's leaving says nothing about your worth as a human being. You are more than this heartbreak. Much more. Your friend Aaron." He'd called me crying after reading it, not sad tears but grateful ones. "You're the kindest stranger I've ever met," he'd said through the phone. "Except you're not really a stranger anymore, are you?" Now, watching Steve rehearse his grand opening speech while pointedly ignoring my existence, I realized Cooper might be the only person who truly understood the art of quiet revenge. I walked to the kitchen far enough away that Steve couldn't hear me and dialed Cooper's number. He answered on the third ring. "Aaron, this is a surprise. Is everything okay?" I stared out our kitchen window at the darkening sky and felt something settle into place inside my chest. Not anger, not sadness, but a calm certainty I hadn't experienced in years. "Coop, I need a favor. The biggest one I'll ever ask." There was a pause. In the background, I could hear what sounded like a television news program. "What kind of favor?" So I told him everything. Not about the 10 years of marriage or the lost inheritance or the gradual disappearance of my identity. Those details wouldn't matter to him. Instead, I told him about Steve's flagship restaurant, about Grace and her real guests' comment, about being banned from an opening celebration for a business I'd helped build with my own hands and money. I didn't cry while I talked. I didn't even feel particularly sad. I just laid out the facts like ingredients in a recipe, letting Cooper understand exactly what kind of dish I was hoping to serve. When I finished, the silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Cooper spoke. "Send me the supply list for the opening menu. The vendor information too if you have it. I'll handle the rest." "Cooper, I don't want you to do anything that could jeopardize your job." "Aaron," he interrupted gently, "I'm not going to do anything illegal or unethical. I'm just going to do my job. Thoroughly. Legally. Quietly." The way he said those words, thoroughly, legally, quietly, sent a shiver of satisfaction down my spine. "That's all I need," I whispered. 2 days before Steve's grand opening, Cooper made his visit to the flagship location. Steve probably didn't even remember him from the food truck days, one inspector among dozens he'd encountered over the years. But Cooper remembered me, and more importantly, he remembered what it felt like to be seen as a person worth saving. Sometimes the most powerful favors are the ones that don't require breaking any rules at all. The gray dress had been hanging in my closet for 2 years, unworn. I'd bought it for a funeral, Steve's mentor's memorial service, but ended up wearing black instead. Tonight it felt perfect. Muted. Invisible. Exactly what I needed to blend into the evening shadows while watching my marriage's grand finale unfold across the street. I positioned myself at the small coffee shop directly opposite Convergence, Steve's flagship restaurant with its pretentious name that Grace had suggested. The cafe stayed open late on weekends, and the barista barely glanced at me when I ordered a single espresso and claimed the window table. From here, I had an unobstructed view of the red carpet entrance, the gathered photographers, and the steady stream of guests arriving in cars that cost more than most people's annual salaries. The October evening air carried the sound of orchestrated celebration across the empty street. Laughter that felt rehearsed. Conversations that sounded like performance pieces. The kind of artificial merriment that happened when everyone present was working an angle, building a network, or playing a role. Steve emerged from the restaurant's front doors at exactly 7:30, resplendent in the navy suit Grace had selected for him. Even from my distance, I could see how he'd transformed himself. Posture straighter, smile wider, gestures more expansive than the man who used to practice knife techniques in our tiny apartment kitchen. He'd become the character Grace had written for him. The visionary chef, the culinary artist, the man who belonged among the city's elite. The photographers moved like a choreographed dance, capturing his descent down the restaurant's stone steps. Flash bulbs created momentary daylight, illuminating his face in artificial brightness while leaving the gathering crowd in comparative darkness. He paused at the designated spots Grace had undoubtedly marked for him, turning his head at practiced angles that would showcase his best profile. Then Grace appeared beside him and my breath caught in my throat. She wore a stunning backless emerald dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her platinum hair swept into an elegant updo that showcased diamond earrings catching the camera flashes. She moved with the fluid confidence of someone who belonged in this world, not someone who'd married into it or worked their way up from food trucks and borrowed money, but someone born to stand in spotlights and give quotable sound bites to local entertainment reporters. From across the street I watched them work the crowd together. Grace would lean in to whisper something in Steve's ear. He'd laugh as if she'd said something brilliant, then approach the next cluster of important guests with renewed energy. They looked like a team. A power couple. The kind of partnership that graced magazine covers and society pages. I realized, with a clarity that surprised me, that I was watching Steve with the woman he actually wanted by his side. Local celebrities, was how the food blogger had described tonight's guest list, but I recognized several faces from the city's social media accounts. The restaurant critic from the daily newspaper, the food photographer whose Instagram account had 500,000 followers, the local morning show host who did weekend dining segments. These were Steve's real guests. The people whose opinions could make or break a restaurant's reputation with a single review or social media post. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment my heart jumped, thinking Steve might have changed his mind and wanted me there after all. Instead it was a photo from my neighbor showing our cat, Muffin, asleep in a patch of evening sunlight. "Keeping me company while you're out," the text read. "Hope you're having a wonderful evening." I almost laughed at the irony. Even my neighbor assumed I was at the opening, probably dressed in my finest outfit, standing proudly beside my successful husband as he achieved his biggest dream. The reality, sitting alone in a coffee shop wearing a funeral dress, watching my marriage's death scene play out through a window, seemed too surreal to explain. Through the restaurant's tall windows, I could see the dining room filling with elegantly dressed guests. The interior design was stunning, warm lighting, exposed brick walls, carefully curated artwork that I recognized from galleries Grace had mentioned in her Instagram posts. It looked exactly like the vision boards I'd created 3 years ago when Steve first started planning this location, except refined and elevated by a professional designer whose name would actually appear in the restaurant's promotional materials. The servers moved through the space with practiced efficiency, carrying silver trays laden with Steve's signature appetizers. I could almost taste the Korean-spiced short rib sliders from here, a recipe Steve had perfected during our food truck days, now presented on bone china plates with microgreen garnishes that probably cost $5 per serving. A wave of bittersweet nostalgia washed over me as I watched guests sample the dishes I'd helped develop. Late nights in our home kitchen, Steve experimenting with flavor combinations while I offered feedback and suggestions. The excitement when he'd nail a new technique or perfect a sauce ratio. The dreams we'd shared about the day when people would pay premium prices to experience his culinary vision. Those dreams were coming true tonight, just without me in them. At 8:15, Steve moved to the restaurant's front steps and called for attention. The crowd quieted, turning toward him with the polite expectation of people who'd attended dozens of similar events. He began his prepared remarks, thanking investors for their belief in his vision, praising his amazing team for their dedication and creativity, expressing gratitude for the support of the culinary community. I waited for my name. Some acknowledgement of the decade I'd spent building this moment alongside him. Even a generic mention of my wife's unwavering support would have felt like something. It never came. Instead he spoke about his journey as if it had been a solo expedition. His vision. His sacrifice. His determination to bring authentic flavors to discerning palates. Grace stood behind him, nodding at appropriate moments, her smile perfect and professional. The applause was enthusiastic but polite, the kind of response that happened when people were still evaluating whether they wanted to be associated with what they were witnessing. This was Steve's audition for the city's culinary elite, and everyone present was deciding whether to cast him in the role he wanted to play. My coffee had grown cold, but I continued sipping it anyway, needing something to do with my hands while I watched this elaborate performance. A few more guests trickled in fashionably late, including a woman I recognized as the food editor for the city's lifestyle magazine. Someone whose review could launch a restaurant into the stratosphere or condemn it to obscurity. That's when I noticed Cooper. He'd arrived so quietly that even I, watching specifically for him, almost missed his entrance. He wore his standard health department uniform, khaki pants, light blue shirt, official badge clearly visible. He carried a clipboard, wore disposable gloves, and had a small cooler that I knew contained testing equipment and sample containers. No one paid attention to him. Health inspectors were background noise at restaurant events, necessary bureaucracy that successful establishments barely acknowledged. He nodded politely to the hostess, showed his credentials, and disappeared into the kitchen area while the celebration continued on the dining room floor. I found myself holding my breath, though I couldn't say exactly what I was hoping for. Cooper had promised to do his job thoroughly, legally, and quietly. He hadn't promised me revenge or vindication or even justice. Just that he would inspect Steve's flagship restaurant with the same meticulous attention he brought to every establishment under his jurisdiction. The difference was that this time he had a reason to look closer than usual. Steve raised his champagne glass toward the crowd, his voice carrying clearly across the street as he proclaimed, "To Convergence, where exceptional ingredients meet innovative techniques to create unforgettable experiences." The guests raised their glasses in response, the golden liquid catching the restaurant's warm lighting. Cameras flashed again, capturing what was meant to be the triumphant moment that launched Steve's career into a new stratosphere. Inside the kitchen, Cooper methodically worked his way through health department protocols, checking temperatures, examining storage procedures, testing samples with the quiet efficiency of a man who understood that food safety wasn't negotiable, regardless of how important the people eating it believed themselves to be. As guests lifted their forks to taste the first course of Steve's exclusive tasting menu, Cooper cleared his throat and stepped forward into the dining room. The timing couldn't have been more perfect if we'd choreographed it ourselves. The dining room fell silent in that particular way that happens when 50 people simultaneously realize something has gone terribly wrong. Cooper stood in the archway between the kitchen and dining area, his clipboard held against his chest like a shield, his expression professionally neutral despite the bomb he was about to drop. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying easily through the suddenly quiet space, "I'm Cooper Henley with the Environmental Health Department. I need to interrupt this evening's festivities." Steve's champagne glass froze halfway to his lips. Grace's perfect smile flickered for just a moment before snapping back into place, though I could see the confusion in her eyes even from across the street. The food blogger who'd been photographing her appetizer slowly lowered her phone. Cooper reached into his folder and withdrew a printed report, the official health department letterhead clearly visible even from my distant perch. "Lab results show the presence of banned preservatives in your imported caviar," he announced, his tone matter-of-fact despite the word's devastating impact. "Specifically, potassium benzoate levels that exceed FDA guidelines by a factor of 3. The collective gasp that rose from the assembled guests was audible even through the coffee shop's windows. I watched as heads turned toward each other, eyebrows raised, phones discreetly pulled from purses and pockets. The lifestyle magazine editor's fork clattered against her plate. But Cooper wasn't finished. "Additionally," he continued, consulting his clipboard with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this countless times before, "your refrigeration logs indicate irregular temperature fluctuations over the past 48 hours. Your walk-in cooler recorded temperatures of 46 degrees for a cumulative period of 6 hours yesterday afternoon. That's a significant contamination risk for your protein storage." Steve's face had progressed from its natural color to an alarming shade of red that clashed with his expensive navy suit. He stepped forward, his media training kicking in as he attempted to control the narrative. "Now hold on," he said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow in the silent room. "I'm sure this is just some kind of technical misunderstanding. These things happen in the restaurant business, right? A little paperwork mix-up, maybe some calibration issues with the thermometers." But no one was laughing with him. The morning show host had already pushed her plate away from her. The Instagram influencer was filming everything, her phone held discreetly at table level while she whispered commentary for her stories. Cooper remained unmoved by Steve's attempted charm offensive. "Sir, food safety isn't a technicality. These violations pose genuine health risks to your patrons." He reached into his folder again and withdrew a formal notice printed on official health department letterhead. I'm issuing a temporary suspension of your food service license pending a complete reinspection and remediation of these issues. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Grace stepped forward, her PR instincts finally kicking into gear. I'm sure we can work something out, she said, her voice maintaining its polished tone despite the crisis unfolding around her. Perhaps we could discuss this privately? Away from the guests. Cooper's expression didn't change. Ma'am, when public health is at risk, there's nothing to discuss privately. The notice is effective immediately. Steve tried one more desperate gambit. Look, Cooper, can I call you Cooper? We've got some very important people here tonight. Food critics, investors, media. Surely we can handle this after the event? I promise you, first thing Monday morning. Mr. Patterson, Cooper interrupted, using Steve's last name with the kind of formal distance that made it clear this wasn't a negotiation. I don't care if the president himself is sitting at table 12. When I find food safety violations this serious, service stops immediately. The camera flashes started then, not the celebratory documentation Grace had orchestrated, but the harsh, urgent clicking of journalists sensing a story. The food blogger was typing furiously on her phone. Someone near the back of the room was already making quiet phone calls, presumably to editors or producers who would want to know about this development. I watched Steve's face cycle through emotions like a broken slot machine. Confusion, anger, humiliation, desperation. This was supposed to be his coronation, the night that established him as a serious player in the city's culinary scene. Instead, it was becoming a public execution of his reputation. I think there's been some kind of mistake, Steve said, his voice rising slightly as panic began to override his media training. We source everything from premium suppliers. Our caviar comes from a renowned European distributor. There's no way. The lab results are conclusive, Cooper said, holding up the report again. Your European distributor appears to be using preservatives that are legal in some countries but banned for import here. It's more common than you might think with luxury ingredients. Grace was frantically typing on her phone, probably trying to figure out how to spin this disaster into something manageable. But around the room I could see the guests making their own calculations. The lifestyle magazine editor had already stood up, her purse in hand. The local celebrity couple was whispering urgently to each other. That's when the exodus began. You know what, said the morning show host, her voice carrying clearly through the room. I'm not risking my stomach for an Instagram post. I've got a show to tape tomorrow. Her declaration seemed to break whatever spell had been keeping the other guests frozen in place. Chairs began scraping against the floor as people stood. Napkins were dropped onto plates. The quiet murmur of polite excuses filled the air. Can't believe I skipped Nobu for this, I heard one man mutter to his companion as they headed toward the exit. Steve stood in the middle of the emptying room like a captain watching his ship sink, his arms hanging uselessly at his sides. Grace was still on her phone, probably trying to call in favors or work damage control, but even she seemed to understand that this particular fire was beyond extinguishing. The restaurant staff looked on helplessly as their grand opening transformed into a public relations nightmare. Servers stood with untouched plates in their hands, unsure whether to continue serving or start clearing tables. The sommelier had stopped mid-pour, a bottle of expensive wine frozen over an abandoned glass. Cooper methodically posted the health department notice on the front window where everyone could see it. A bright yellow paper that might as well have been a scarlet letter. The photographers captured that moment too, the official seal clearly visible in their shots. Within 20 minutes, the restaurant was nearly empty except for staff, a few stragglers who seemed unsure whether they were allowed to leave, and Steve standing in the wreckage of his dreams. By the time I finished my cold coffee and walked home, the story was already appearing on social media. Flagship launch shut down for food safety violation, topped the food blogger's Instagram. Caviar catastrophe at celebrity chef's debut, was the headline on the morning show's website. I didn't need to share the story myself. Everyone else was doing it for me. My phone started ringing at 11:30 that night, Steve's ringtone cutting through the silence of our house. I was in the bathtub by then, a glass of wine balanced on the edge of the tub, watching the local news replay footage of the evening's disaster. I let it go to voicemail. The second call came 5 minutes later. Then a third. Each time I simply reached over and declined the call, watching my phone screen light up with his name before going dark again. The 11 o'clock news led with the story. A highly anticipated restaurant opening turned into a food safety nightmare tonight, the anchor said, while video footage of Cooper posting the health department notice played behind her. Sources say a tip to health officials led to the surprise inspection that shut down the event. I smiled at that detail. The mystery tip-off that had led to Cooper's perfectly timed inspection. It wasn't technically true, but it made for a better story than the reality of an old friendship and a favor quietly called in. I poured myself another glass of wine and sank deeper into the warm water, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. The satisfaction of being exactly where I belonged, exactly when I needed to be there. Even if that place was alone in my bathtub, watching my husband's dreams crumble on the evening news. The phone call started at 6:30 Friday morning, less than 48 hours after Cooper's yellow notice had been posted on Convergence's front window. I was making coffee when Steve's phone rang for the 8th time in 10 minutes, each call lasting exactly long enough for someone to deliver bad news before hanging up. Marcus Steinberg just pulled his investment, Steve said after ending the latest call, his voice hollow as he stared at his phone screen. $200,000. Gone. I poured my coffee slowly, saying nothing. Marcus had been one of Steve's earliest believers, a local businessman who'd seen potential in the food truck concept and helped fund the first brick-and-mortar location. His withdrawal wasn't just financial. It was a vote of no confidence that would ripple through the investor community. He's not the only one, Steve continued, scrolling through his missed calls. Jennifer Chen wants a refund on her entire stake. Says her husband's law firm can't be associated with food safety violations. And David Morrison. He paused, his face growing paler. David's threatening to sue for false representation. Claims I misled him about our supplier relationships. I watched Steve's empire begin its collapse with the detached fascination of someone observing a controlled demolition. Each phone call was another explosive charge, carefully placed to bring down the structure he'd built on borrowed money and inflated promises. Grace's damage control efforts, which had begun with frantic phone calls the night of the shutdown, were proving ineffective. Her carefully cultivated media connections weren't returning her calls. The lifestyle magazine that had planned a feature spread on Convergence suddenly had space constraints. The Food Network producer who'd expressed interest in a potential show about Steve's rise from food trucks to fine dining went radio silent. No one wants to touch us right now, Grace admitted during a tense phone conversation that I couldn't help but overhear. The story has too much traction. Every food blog in the city is covering it. My other clients are starting to ask questions about their association with the firm. By Tuesday, the staff exodus had begun. Marcus Rodriguez, the head chef Steve had poached from a respected downtown establishment, submitted his resignation via email at 7 a.m. His message was professionally worded but devastating in its implications. Given recent developments and concerns about food safety protocols, I feel it's in my best interest to seek opportunities elsewhere. Marcus had been Steve's crown jewel, a classically trained chef with impeccable credentials and a following among serious food enthusiasts. His departure sent a clear signal to the culinary community that Convergence's problems ran deeper than a single health department citation. The sous chef, Carmen Torres, followed Marcus out the door, but not before making sure the industry knew exactly why she was leaving. Screenshots of text messages began circulating on social media, showing Steve dismissing supplier warnings about the European caviar distributor. "Boss says the European stuff is fine," read one message Carmen had shared in a private chef group on Facebook. "Higher profit margins, he says. Customers won't know the difference." Another screenshot showed Steve's response to Carmen's concerns about the walk-in cooler's temperature fluctuations. "It's fine. Just adjust the logs if anyone asks. These health inspectors don't know restaurant operations like we do." The messages painted a picture of a chef more concerned with profit margins than food safety, someone willing to cut corners to impress investors and maximize returns. The culinary community, which valued reputation above almost everything else, began distancing itself from Steve with ruthless efficiency. Within a week, 3 more kitchen staff members had quit, followed by 2 servers and the sommelier. Each departure was another crack in the foundation, another signal that working at Convergence had become a liability rather than a career asset. Steve's response to the mounting crisis was perhaps the most damaging decision he could have made. Instead of accepting responsibility and working quietly to rebuild trust, he chose to fight back publicly. The video appeared on Convergence's Instagram account on Thursday morning. A 5-minute statement filmed in the empty restaurant, with Steve standing behind the chef's counter in his pristine white coat, addressing the camera with barely controlled anger. "What happened last Friday was the result of a malicious vendetta," he declared, his voice rising as he spoke. "Someone with a personal grudge against me orchestrated this entire situation. This wasn't a random inspection. This was sabotage, pure and simple." I watched the video from my laptop, coffee growing cold as I witnessed Steve's public meltdown in real time. He looked haggard, his usual media polish replaced by the desperate energy of someone watching their life's work disintegrate. "Jealous competitors have been trying to undermine me since day one," he continued, his hands gesturing wildly. "They can't stand to see someone succeed who came up the hard way, who built something from nothing. So they manufacture scandals, they spread lies, they corrupt the very institutions that are supposed to protect honest business owners." The video was a public relations disaster of epic proportions. Comments began flooding in immediately, ranging from sympathetic to scathing, but the overwhelming response was disbelief at Steve's refusal to take responsibility for his restaurant's violations. "Dude, you literally ignored supplier warnings," wrote one commenter, attaching a screenshot of Carmen's leaked messages. "How is that sabotage? Playing the victim when you put people's health at risk? Classy," added another. Food bloggers picked apart his claims with forensic precision, pointing out that health inspections were random and regulated, not subject to personal vendettas. The local newspaper's restaurant critic published a scathing editorial about accountability in the food service industry, using Steve's video as an example of how not to handle a crisis. But the final blow came from an unexpected source: the European caviar supplier Steve had been working with. Faced with mounting scrutiny, the distributor released their own statement confirming that they had warned Steve multiple times about import regulations and preservative levels. Email records showed a pattern of Steve dismissing their concerns and insisting on cheaper alternatives that skirted FDA guidelines. Mr. Patterson was informed on multiple occasions that certain preservation methods used in our European facilities do not meet United States import standards, the supplier's statement read. "We provided alternative products that were compliant, but he consistently chose the non-compliant options due to their lower cost and higher profit margins." The statement was the final nail in Steve's credibility coffin. His claims of sabotage and vendetta crumbled under the weight of documented evidence showing his own decision-making had led to the violations. Grace's departure, when it came, was as swift and professional as everything else she'd done. No dramatic confrontation, no public statement, just a quietly updated website that no longer listed Convergence among her firm's clients, and a voicemail message informing Steve that their contract had been terminated. Her absence left a void that Steve seemed incapable of filling. Without Grace's media connections and crisis management expertise, he was left to navigate the scandal alone, and his every move seemed to make things worse. The industry publications began running retrospective pieces about warning signs they claimed to have noticed all along. Food and Wine published an article titled, "When Ambition Outpaces Ethics," using Steve's downfall as a cautionary tale about rapid expansion and corner-cutting in the restaurant industry. Through it all, I remained silent. I didn't post celebratory messages on social media. I didn't give interviews to reporters who reached out after discovering my connection to Steve. I didn't even correct people who assumed I was devastated by my husband's professional collapse. Instead, I focused on rebuilding what I'd lost. My old design clients tentatively reached out to welcome me back with surprising warmth. Projects I'd abandoned years ago to support Steve's dreams were still waiting for me, along with new opportunities I'd never expected. Cooper's card arrived on a Tuesday, 2 weeks after the grand opening disaster. A simple white card with health department letterhead, containing just 4 words in his careful handwriting: "Favor returned. Well done." I framed it immediately and placed it next to my laptop, where it serves as a daily reminder that quiet integrity often accomplishes more than grand gestures. Next to it sits my business license renewal form, freshly signed with my own name, not as Steve's wife or business partner, but as Erin Matthews, graphic designer. For the first time in years, No one would be erasing my name from anything I created. 3 months after Cooper's card arrived, I was reorganizing my home office when I found the old photo tucked between design portfolios I hadn't touched in years. Steve and me at the food truck, both of us grinning like idiots, covered in flour and sauce stains, holding up the day's earnings, $63 and change. We looked exhausted and ecstatic and completely in love with the possibility of what we were building together. I stared at that photo for a long time, waiting to feel something. Sadness maybe. Nostalgia for what we'd lost. Instead, I felt oddly grateful, not for the pain or the betrayal, but for the clarity that had emerged from the wreckage. Steve once said I'd embarrass him in front of his real guests. The irony wasn't lost on me now. 4 months after he spoke those words, I'd tortured myself with questions. Was I too quiet at parties? Too plain compared to Grace's polished sophistication? Too ordinary for the elevated world Steve was trying to enter? I'd stand in front of mirrors, cataloging my flaws, wondering how I'd become someone worth hiding. But sitting in my office, surrounded by the evidence of my rebuilt life, client contracts, design sketches, business cards with my name printed in bold letters, I finally understood. Steve hadn't been ashamed of me. He'd been ashamed of himself. I was a reminder of where he'd come from. The borrowed money, the failed pop-ups, the nights when we'd counted quarters to buy groceries while he chased his dreams. Grace represented who he wanted to become: successful, connected, untouchable. I represented who he'd been: struggling, uncertain, human. He tried to erase me because he was trying to erase his own history. Convergence eventually reopened after a month of renovations and what Steve's lawyer euphemistically called comprehensive compliance upgrades. The yellow health department notice came down, replaced by a shiny new permit and a hastily installed surveillance system for the walk-in coolers. But the damage had been done. The first week back, the restaurant served maybe 20 covers a night, a catastrophic number for a place that needed to serve 200 just to break even. The local food bloggers who'd once competed for reservations now treated Convergence like a cautionary tale, if they mentioned it at all. Reviews when they came were brutal in their politeness. While the technical execution shows improvement, wrote the city's most influential food critic, it's difficult to taste anything beyond the lingering aftertaste of poor judgment. The lifestyle magazine that had planned a feature spread published instead a brief mention in their Second Chances section, the restaurant equivalent of being damned with faint praise. The nickname stuck with devastating efficiency: the place that poisoned influencers. Food delivery drivers would make jokes about hazmat suits when picking up orders. Local comedians worked Convergence into their sets. A popular food podcast did an entire episode called Caviar Gate, a study in how not to launch a restaurant. Steve tried everything to rebuild his reputation. He hired a new PR firm, not as prestigious as Grace's, but hungry enough to take on a damaged client. He offered free tastings to food bloggers. He partnered with local charities, donating meals to homeless shelters in carefully orchestrated photo opportunities. Nothing worked. The rebrand attempt was perhaps the most desperate move. 6 months after the reopening, Convergence quietly became the Phoenix, a name so heavy-handed in its symbolism that local food writers mocked it mercilessly. New menus, new color scheme, new everything except the fundamental problem. No one trusted Steve Patterson anymore. Through all of this, I maintained my silence. No vindictive social media posts. No tell-all interviews with the journalists who occasionally reached out. No dramatic confrontations when Steve would come home late, reeking of failure and expensive cologne that couldn't mask his desperation. The absence of drama was its own kind of victory. Steve seemed to expect me to gloat, to throw his cruel words back in his face, to claim credit for his downfall. Instead, I gave him something far more unsettling: indifference. I was polite when we passed in the hallway. I made coffee for 2 in the morning without comment. I continued to share our bed while building a life that had nothing to do with him. That silence was more devastating than any accusation could have been, because it forced Steve to live with the truth every single day, that I had helped build everything he'd achieved, and in trying to erase me, he'd erased himself. My design business flourished with a speed that surprised even me. Word spread through the creative community that Aaron Matthews was available again, and projects materialized faster than I could handle them. A local nonprofit needed a complete brand overhaul. A boutique hotel wanted custom signage. A startup tech company hired me to design their entire visual identity. For the first time in a decade, I was building something that belonged entirely to me. The real transformation began when I started hosting small gatherings in our living room, art-focused events I called Canvas and Conversation. The first one was almost accidental. Sarah, a photographer I'd met through a client project, had mentioned feeling isolated as a creative professional. On impulse, I invited her over for wine and painting on a Thursday evening. She brought her friend Maya, a jewelry designer going through a difficult divorce. Maya brought her neighbor Elena, a writer struggling to finish her first novel. By the third Thursday, I had 8 women crowded around my dining room table, painting watercolor abstracts and sharing stories that ranged from hilarious to heartbreaking. These weren't networking events or business meetings. They were something more valuable. A space where women could exist as themselves, not as extensions of their jobs or relationships or social expectations. We were teachers and entrepreneurs and mothers and artists, but for 3 hours every week we were just ourselves. I haven't painted since high school, Elena confessed during our 4th gathering, holding up a canvas covered in bold strokes of purple and gold. I forgot how good it feels to create something that doesn't have to be perfect. That's the point, I replied, mixing colors on my palette. We spend so much time trying to be what other people need us to be. Sometimes we forget who we are when no one's watching. The gatherings grew organically. Women brought friends who brought sisters who brought colleagues. We moved from my dining room to my garage, then to a rented space in the arts district. What had started as an impulse became a small movement. A place where creativity and community intersected without judgment or competition. I was no longer Steve Patterson's wife or even Erin Patterson, the woman who'd sacrificed her career for someone else's dreams. I was simply Erin, designer, facilitator, friend. The name on my business cards matched the name on my art supplies, and both belonged entirely to me. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a courier who seemed embarrassed to be there. Steve had filed quietly, probably hoping to avoid any additional media attention. The grounds were irreconcilable differences, which struck me as hilariously inadequate given everything that had happened. I signed them without hesitation. Last week I was at the farmer's market when I noticed a specialty food vendor offering caviar tastings. A small crowd had gathered around his booth, sampling different varieties while he explained the nuances of preparation and sourcing. This one's from a certified sustainable farm in California, he was saying, spooning tiny black pearls onto mother-of-pearl spoons. No preservatives, no additives, just pure flavor. I accepted the sample he offered, letting the caviar dissolve on my tongue. It was clean, briny, perfect. Nothing like the adulterated product that had destroyed Steve's reputation. As I walked away, I found myself smiling. Some dishes I thought are definitely better spoiled. And sometimes the quietest woman in the room, the one everyone overlooks, the one deemed unworthy of inclusion, she's the one who gets to serve the final course. She's the one who decides how the story ends. The Phoenix closed permanently last month. Steve moved to another city, chasing a fresh start in a place where his name didn't carry the weight of scandal. I stayed exactly where I belonged, in the life I'd built from the ashes of the one he'd tried to erase. If this story of quiet revenge had you cheering for Erin, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Cooper stepped into that dining room with his clipboard, knowing exactly what he was about to unleash. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.
I'm Emma, 29 years old, and I never thought I'd be the villain of our family vacation to Maine. It was supposed to be a perfect getaway at a lakeside cabin, but instead, I became the target of blame simply because I stood up for my mother's health when no one else would. The bitter words, "You ruined our vacation," still echo in my mind, especially for my sister Melissa, who couldn't see past her own desires. Family can be your greatest support or your deepest wound. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're from, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear more stories of family struggles and healing. Growing up in our middle-class household in Connecticut, the dynamics between me, my sister Melissa, and our parents were established early. Melissa, now 33, was always the golden child. With her outgoing personality and ability to charm everyone she met, my parents, Diane and Richard, gravitated toward her naturally. I don't blame them. Melissa lights up a room when she enters. She's the kind of person who makes friends at the grocery store checkout line and gets invited to parties by people she just met. My father especially adored her, always laughing at her jokes and prioritizing her needs. I, on the other hand, was the responsible one. While Melissa was out winning swim meets and being crowned prom queen, I was helping Mom with dinner, making sure Dad's shirts were ironed for work, and maintaining a steady 3.8 GPA that nobody particularly celebrated. It wasn't that my parents didn't love me, they did, but there was always an unspoken expectation that I would be the reliable one, the one who wouldn't cause trouble or need attention. As we grew into adulthood, these roles only solidified. Melissa moved through 3 different college majors before settling on communications, with our parents funding each transition without complaint. When she wanted to spend a year finding herself in Europe after graduation, they helped with that too. Meanwhile, I worked part-time through college, graduated with an accounting degree, and immediately secured a position at a respectable firm in Hartford. My achievements were acknowledged with quiet nods rather than celebration. The past 2 years had brought significant changes to our family. Mom's health had begun deteriorating due to complications from type 2 diabetes. Her condition required daily medication, regular monitoring of blood sugar levels, and occasional doctor visits when things became unstable. Dad tried to help, but he was often overwhelmed by the medical details. That responsibility fell to me, researching her condition, organizing her medications, and driving her to appointments when necessary. Melissa would call occasionally to check in, but her life in Boston kept her busy with her marketing job and active social life. Her concern was genuine but fleeting. She had a habit of asking how Mom was doing and then immediately shifting the conversation to her latest dating drama or work conflict. The idea for the family vacation came from Melissa during one of our rare family dinners 3 months ago. Mom had been having a particularly difficult time with her health, and Melissa suggested that what everyone needed was a change of scenery to reset. "We should rent that cabin in Maine that the Andersons went to last summer," she said excitedly. "It's right on the lake, totally peaceful. Mom could rest, Dad could fish, and we could all just relax together for once." The idea took hold immediately. Dad nodded enthusiastically, and Mom's eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. "That sounds wonderful," Mom said, reaching for Melissa's hand across the table. "I've been feeling so cooped up lately." I hesitated. Summer was a busy time at my firm, and taking a week off would mean working double time before and after. Plus, there were Mom's health considerations. Would there be medical facilities nearby? Would the cabin be accessible if she had mobility issues? But seeing the hope on Mom's face, I kept these concerns to myself. "Great, it's settled," Melissa declared, already pulling out her phone. "I'll look into booking it next week." But as weeks passed, the actual planning fell to me. Melissa sent links to the cabin rental, but didn't follow through with the booking. Dad talked about fishing but didn't research permits. Mom was excited but tired easily when trying to help plan. So I took over, making lists, booking the cabin, researching nearby medical facilities, planning menus that would accommodate Mom's dietary restrictions, and arranging for time off work. 2 days before we were set to leave, Melissa called me in a panic. "Emma, I completely forgot to request vacation days. Can you call the cabin and see if we can move the trip back a week?" I gripped my phone tightly. "Melissa, that's not possible. I've already arranged everything based on the original dates. I've taken time off work, which wasn't easy to get approved. Mom's doctor appointments are scheduled around this trip." "But I really want to come," she whined. "Can't you figure something out?" After a tense conversation, Melissa finally said she'd make it work by taking unpaid time off and facing her boss's disappointment. The way she said it made it sound like she was making a tremendous sacrifice, and part of me felt guilty even though the situation was entirely of her making. The night before our departure, I methodically packed my suitcase, including a separate bag with all of Mom's medications clearly labeled with dosage instructions. I printed maps of the route to the cabin, locations of the nearest hospitals and pharmacies, and a list of local restaurants that could accommodate Mom's dietary needs. I was exhausted but hopeful. Despite the planning stress, I genuinely looked forward to spending quality time with my family away from our regular routines. Maybe this trip would help us connect in ways we hadn't in years. Maybe Dad would finally notice how much I contributed. Maybe Melissa would step up and show more responsibility. With these hopeful thoughts, I finally fell asleep, dreaming of peaceful lake views and harmonious family meals. Little did I know that the reality would be dramatically different, and that this vacation would become a turning point in how I viewed my family and myself. My alarm jolted me awake at 5:30 a.m. on the day of our departure. We had agreed to leave by 8 o'clock to avoid traffic and make the 6-hour drive to Maine with plenty of daylight remaining. I shuffled to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face to chase away the lingering fatigue from a restless night of last-minute planning worries. By 6:15, I had double-checked Mom's medication bag, confirming that each pill bottle was properly labeled with clear instructions. I'd created a schedule for her medications that accounted for our travel time and the change in routine. I placed the schedule in a bright red folder that would be impossible to miss. At 7 o'clock, I loaded my bags into my car and drove the short distance to my parents' house, where we would all meet before transferring everything to Dad's SUV for the trip. Mom greeted me at the door in her travel outfit, comfortable pants, and a light sweater despite the summer heat. Diabetes affected her circulation, leaving her perpetually cold. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, hugging me. "I've been up since 5, too excited to sleep." Dad was in the kitchen, studying a fishing magazine and nursing his second cup of coffee. "Morning, Emma," he said with a quick glance up. "Ready for vacation mode?" I smiled and began organizing the cooler with drinks and snacks for the road, including sugar-free options for Mom. The clock ticked past 7:30, and there was still no sign of Melissa. Dad checked his watch with increasing frequency as 8 o'clock approached. At 8:15, Dad finally called her. I could hear Melissa's voice through the phone, bright and unapologetic. "I'm just finishing packing. Give me 30 minutes, tops." Dad sighed, but didn't protest. "All right, we'll wait. Drive safe getting here." I bit my tongue to avoid pointing out that Melissa lived only 15 minutes away and had no reason to be late. Instead, I used the extra time to review our route once more and check that we had all the necessary chargers for phones and Mom's blood glucose monitor. Melissa finally breezed in at 9:10, wearing designer sunglasses and carrying an oversized tote along with her suitcase. "Sorry, everyone. I couldn't decide what shoes to bring, and then I realized I needed to stop for coffee." She held up a takeout cup as evidence. Dad took her bags without comment and began loading them into the SUV. I noticed he had to rearrange everything I had carefully packed to accommodate Melissa's excessive luggage. Mom just smiled indulgently, happy that we were all finally together. By 9:30, we were on the road, more than an hour and a half behind schedule. Melissa immediately claimed the front passenger seat. I get carsick in the back, leaving me in the rear with Mom. I didn't mind. It gave me a chance to keep an eye on her. The drive north was beautiful as suburban landscapes gave way to increasingly rural scenery. Dad played his favorite classic rock station, and Melissa chatted animatedly about her friends and work drama. I gazed out the window, allowing myself to relax slightly as miles passed beneath our wheels. Around noon, we stopped at a roadside diner in Massachusetts. The place had a charming retro aesthetic with chrome fixtures and vinyl booths. Mom checked her blood sugar while I reviewed the menu for suitable options. "The grilled chicken salad should be good for you, Mom," I suggested. "Light on the dressing." Melissa rolled her eyes. "God, Emma, let Mom eat what she wants for once. We're on vacation." "It's fine," Mom interjected quickly. "The salad sounds perfect." When our food arrived, Melissa immediately complained about her burger. I asked for medium rare, and this is definitely medium well. She pouted, poking at it with her fork. She called the server over and requested a replacement, delaying our meal by another 15 minutes. I noticed Mom looking tired, her face slightly pale. Did you take your noon medication? I asked quietly. She nodded. I'm just a little tired from sitting so long. I'll be fine once we get back on the road. After lunch, we continued north. Melissa dozed in the front seat while I kept Mom company in the back, playing word games to pass the time. The further north we drove, the more spectacular the scenery became. Dense forests lined the highway, occasionally breaking to reveal glimpses of sparkling lakes or rolling hills. We crossed into Maine in the mid-afternoon, and I felt a sense of anticipation building. Despite the delayed start and lunch drama, the vacation still held promise. Around 4:30 p.m., Dad turned onto a narrow road that wound through pine forests. After several miles of increasingly remote terrain, we rounded a bend and caught our first glimpse of the cabin. It was more beautiful than the photos had suggested. Perched on a gentle slope overlooking a vast, clear lake, the log cabin featured a wraparound deck and large windows that reflected the water's shimmer. Tall pines surrounded it, providing privacy and shade. A small dock extended into the lake, with a rowboat tied alongside it. "Oh my," Mom breathed, her fatigue momentarily forgotten. "It's perfect." Even Melissa sat up straighter, putting away her phone for the first time in hours. "Wow, the Andersons weren't exaggerating. This place is gorgeous." Dad parked in the gravel driveway, and we all climbed out, stretching after the long drive. The air smelled of pine and clean water, significantly cooler and fresher than back home. For a moment, we stood together, taking in the view and the peaceful silence, broken only by birdsong and the gentle lapping of water against the shore. The moment of family unity was brief, but powerful. I felt a surge of optimism. Maybe this was exactly what we all needed. I took charge of unloading the car, directing Dad and Melissa to carry bags inside while I organized our supplies. The cabin's interior was as impressive as its setting. Knotty pine walls, comfortable furniture, a stone fireplace, and a kitchen that opened to a dining area with lake views. 3 bedrooms branched off from the main living space, along with 2 bathrooms. "I call the room with the lake view," Melissa announced immediately. Dad nodded. "Your mother and I will take the master bedroom. Emma, you're okay with the small room in the back, right?" It wasn't really a question. I nodded and carried my bag to the smallest bedroom, which overlooked the driveway rather than the lake. The room was perfectly adequate, clean and cozy with a comfortable-looking twin bed and a small dresser. I unpacked quickly, then set about organizing Mom's medication station on the kitchen counter, arranging pill bottles, her glucose monitor, and the schedule I'd created. By early evening, we were settled in. Dad figured out how to operate the gas grill on the deck, and we enjoyed a simple dinner of grilled chicken and vegetables as the sun began to set over the lake. The water turned to molten gold in the fading light, then deepened to purple as dusk settled around us. "This was a wonderful idea," Mom said, squeezing Melissa's hand. "Thank you for suggesting it." Melissa beamed, accepting the credit without mentioning my weeks of planning and organization. But in that peaceful moment, with my family around me and the beautiful lake before us, I didn't mind. The vacation was off to a good start, despite the minor hiccups. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I allowed myself to hope that the rest of our time here would bring the family connection I'd been craving. I woke with the sunrise, my body still on work schedule despite the vacation setting. The small bedroom was filled with soft morning light filtering through the simple white curtains. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the cabin, the gentle creaking of the wood, distant birdsong, and the barely perceptible sound of water lapping at the shore. By 7 a.m., I was in the kitchen, coffee brewing and breakfast preparations underway. I'd planned a hearty breakfast of whole-grain pancakes with fresh berries, Mom's favorite, and suitable for her dietary needs if she limited the maple syrup. The cabin's previous occupants had left the kitchen well-stocked with basics, and I'd brought specialty items for Mom's diet. Mom joined me around 7:30, looking rested and moving with more energy than I'd seen in weeks. "Something smells wonderful," she said, accepting the mug of coffee I handed her. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble, Emma." "It's no trouble," I replied truthfully. There was something calming about cooking in this beautiful space with the lake visible through the windows. Did you sleep well? Better than I have in months, she admitted. Something about the air here. Dad appeared shortly after, dressed in his fishing clothes and eager to try out the lake. He kissed Mom on the cheek and poured himself coffee. These pancakes for everyone, Emma? I nodded. I thought we could all eat together before heading out for the day. I found a trail map yesterday. There's a beginner-friendly hiking path that loops around part of the lake. Should take about 2 hours, perfect for this morning before it gets too hot. Sounds great, Dad agreed. I noticed the boat has fishing gear stored in it. Thought I might try my luck after the hike. We had discussed the day's plans over dinner the night before, agreeing to meet for breakfast at 8:00 and leave for the hike by 9 o'clock. But as 8:30 approached, Melissa still hadn't appeared. Mom set aside a plate of pancakes for her while Dad checked his watch with increasing frequency. Should I go wake her? I asked finally. Dad shook his head. Let her sleep. She works hard and needs her rest. I bit back a response about how we all worked hard. Instead, I began cleaning up the kitchen, wrapping Melissa's portion for later. At 9:15, with still no sign of Melissa, Dad started to show signs of impatience. Maybe we should just head out. She can catch up with us if she wakes up. Mom looked torn, but she'll be disappointed to miss the hike. Let's wait a little longer. We compromised by preparing for the hike, filling water bottles, applying sunscreen, and gathering the trail map and a small first aid kit I packed. By the time we were ready, it was nearly 10:00, and the morning's coolness was already giving way to summer heat. Just as we were about to leave without her, Melissa finally emerged from her bedroom, yawning and stretching in pajamas. Morning, everyone, she said casually, as if we hadn't been waiting for 2 hours. We were about to leave for the hike, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Melissa blinked. Oh, right, the hike. Sorry, I completely forgot. Give me 15 minutes to get ready. 15 minutes stretched to 30 as Melissa showered, changed, and finally joined us, her hair perfectly styled despite the upcoming physical activity. By then, it was nearly 10:45, and the temperature had risen significantly. We'll need to shorten the route, I said, studying the map. It's getting too hot for the full loop, especially for Mom. Melissa frowned, but I wanted to see the lookout point that was mentioned in the cabin guidebook. We can try again tomorrow if we start on time, I suggested, avoiding looking directly at her. The abbreviated hike was still pleasant, with the trail winding through fragrant pine forests and occasionally opening to stunning lake views. Mom moved slowly but steadily, and I stayed close to her, watching for any signs of fatigue or distress. Dad ranged ahead with Melissa, their conversation punctuated by her bright laughter. About halfway through the hike, I noticed Mom's pace slowing further, her breathing becoming labored. Let's take a break, I suggested, guiding her to a fallen log that offered a makeshift bench. She sank down gratefully. Just need to catch my breath. It's been a while since I've done this much walking. I handed her a water bottle and discreetly checked her for other symptoms. Her face was flushed from exertion, but not alarmingly so. How do you feel otherwise? Any dizziness or unusual fatigue? I'm fine, Emma, she assured me, though I noticed she drank the water eagerly. Just out of shape. Don't worry so much. Dad and Melissa had noticed our stop and doubled back. Everything okay? Dad asked, his brow furrowed. Just taking a short rest, Mom replied before I could speak. Enjoying the scenery. The rest of the hike was taken at a slower pace, with more frequent breaks. By the time we returned to the cabin, it was past noon, and the day had grown genuinely hot. Mom went to lie down, insisting she was just tired from the exercise. I checked her blood sugar levels before she napped, slightly elevated but not dangerously so. Dad headed out to try fishing from the dock, and Melissa announced she was going to sunbathe. I used the time to prepare a light lunch for when Mom woke up and to plan the next day's activities with more realistic timing. Around 2:00 p.m., we gathered for lunch on the deck. Mom looked refreshed after her nap, and the tension from the morning's delays seemed to have dissipated. Dad proudly showed pictures of a small bass he'd caught and released. I thought we could try that seafood restaurant in town for dinner tonight, I suggested. The reviews are great, and they have plenty of options that would work for Mom's diet. Actually, Melissa interjected, I met some people while I was sunbathing on the dock. Local guys with a boat who know all the best spots around the lake. They recommended a different place, the Lobster Trap, supposed to be the best seafood for miles. Did you check if they have menu options for diabetics? I asked. Melissa rolled her eyes. Not everything has to revolve around dietary restrictions, Emma. I'm sure they have salads or something. Dad, predictably, sided with Melissa. The Lobster Trap sounds great. It's good to get recommendations from locals. I let it go, making a mental note to check the restaurant's menu online before we left. Mom caught my eye and gave a small shrug that seemed to say, it's not worth arguing about. After lunch, Melissa disappeared into her room to freshen up, emerging an hour later in a new outfit with her makeup redone. By the way, she announced casually, I might not join you all tomorrow for the lighthouse tour. The guys I met invited me to go out on their boat. But we planned this together, Mom said, a note of disappointment in her voice. I was looking forward to all of us seeing the lighthouse. I know, Mom, but how often do I get to go boating with cute local guys? You understand, right? Melissa's tone was wheedling, the same one she'd used successfully throughout childhood to get her way. I guess so, Mom conceded. Just be careful with strangers, honey. I couldn't keep quiet any longer. Melissa, we came here for family vacation. We've only been here one day, and you're already making separate plans? Don't be so controlling, Emma, Melissa snapped. Just because you have no social life doesn't mean I have to be glued to the family 24/7. That's enough, Dad intervened, but his tone was milder than if I had spoken to Melissa that way. Melissa can spend one day doing her own thing. We'll still have plenty of family time. The exchange left a sour taste in my mouth. As we prepared to leave for dinner, I caught Melissa texting rapidly, a small smile playing on her lips. She was already mentally checked out of family time, and we'd barely begun our vacation. The Lobster Trap turned out to be a touristy establishment with long wait times and a limited menu. Mom struggled to find suitable options and eventually settled for a plain grilled fish that came out dry and overcooked. Melissa dominated the dinner conversation with stories about her job and friends in Boston, barely asking questions about anyone else's life. Dad encouraged her, laughing at her anecdotes and asking follow-up questions, while Mom smiled tiredly and picked at her food. I sat quietly, observing the family dynamics I'd known all my life playing out in this new setting. Melissa at the center of attention, Dad facilitating her spotlight, Mom peacekeeping, and me on the periphery. I'd hoped the change of scenery might shift these patterns, but so far, the vacation was only reinforcing them. Back at the cabin, Melissa announced she was going to take a moonlight walk along the shore. Don't wait up, she called as she headed out the door, phone in hand. I suspected she was meeting up with her new friends. Dad turned on the television to catch a baseball game, and Mom settled beside him with a book. I retreated to my small bedroom, lying awake and listening to the unfamiliar night sounds of the lake, wondering if I was the only one who felt the undercurrent of tension beneath our supposed vacation idyll. The third morning of our vacation dawned bright and clear. I woke early again, checking the weather forecast on my phone. Perfect conditions for the boat trip we had reserved weeks ago. A local tour company offered a 3-hour cruise around the lake, pointing out wildlife and historical sites. Mom had been particularly excited about this activity, as it required minimal exertion while still allowing her to experience the natural beauty of the area. I headed to the kitchen to start breakfast, stopping briefly to check on Mom and Dad's closed door. They were still sleeping, which was good. Mom needed the rest. I started coffee and began mixing batter for blueberry muffins, a recipe I knew Mom loved. As the muffins baked, filling the cabin with their sweet aroma, I realized I hadn't heard any movement from Melissa's room either. Given yesterday's pattern, I wasn't surprised. Our boat tour was scheduled for 11:00 a.m., giving us plenty of time for a leisurely breakfast and the short drive to the marina. Mom and Dad emerged around 8:30, drawn by the smell of coffee and fresh baking. Mom looked well-rested, her color good. I discreetly watched as she checked her blood sugar and took her morning medication. "These muffins are wonderful, Emma," she said, selecting one from the cooling rack. "You're spoiling us." Dad poured himself coffee and peered out the window at the lake. Perfect day for boating. "What time do we need to leave?" "We should head out by 10:15 to be safe," I replied. "The marina is about 20 minutes away, and they asked us to arrive 15 minutes before departure to check in." Dad nodded. "I'll make sure Melissa is up by 9:30. We enjoyed a pleasant breakfast on the deck, watching early morning kayakers glide across the lake's still surface. At 9:30, Dad knocked on Melissa's door but received no answer. He knocked again, louder this time, then cautiously opened the door. "She's not here," he said, returning to the deck with a confused expression. "Bed doesn't look slept in." A flicker of concern crossed Mom's face. "Do you think she's okay? Should we call her?" "I'm sure she's fine," Dad said, though he immediately pulled out his phone to dial her number. After several rings, it went to voicemail. He left a message reminding her about the boat tour. By 10:00, there was still no sign of Melissa, and her continued absence was creating a nervous atmosphere. Dad tried calling again with the same result. "Maybe she stayed with those friends she met," he suggested, though he looked uncomfortable with the idea. Mom's worry was more visible now. "She should have let us know. That's not like her." I refrained from pointing out that it was exactly like Melissa to do what she wanted, without considering others. Instead, I busied myself packing a small cooler with water bottles and snacks for the boat trip. As 10:15 approached, our planned departure time, I noticed something else troubling. "Dad, where are the car keys? We should get going." Dad patted his pockets and frowned. "They should be on the hook by the door where I left them." A quick search confirmed what I was beginning to suspect. The keys were gone, and so was the car. Melissa had taken it without asking, without leaving a note, and without considering that we might need it. Dad's expression darkened. "She knows we have the boat tour today. Why would she take the car without saying anything?" The situation grew more concerning when Mom opened the refrigerator and frowned. "Emma, didn't you put my backup insulin in here? I can't find it." A quick inventory of Mom's medication revealed the problem. Her emergency insulin was missing from its designated spot. It should have been in the refrigerator door, clearly labeled. Most of her daily medications were still in place on the counter, but the insulin she might need in case of a blood sugar spike was gone. With a sinking feeling, I realized it must be in the small cooler bag I had packed for emergencies, the same bag that was now in the trunk of our missing car. "I need to call Melissa again," Dad said, his voice tight with anger now. This time, he left a more urgent message. "Melissa, call us immediately. Mom's insulin is in the car and we need it. Plus, we're going to miss our boat reservation." The next hour was tense. We tried calling Melissa repeatedly, each call going to voicemail. Mom insisted she was fine for now. She had taken her regular morning dose and had enough medication for the day as long as her blood sugar remained stable. But the missing emergency insulin was a safety concern we couldn't ignore. At 10:45, I made the decision to cancel our boat tour reservation. The marina was too far to walk, especially in the growing heat of the day, and we couldn't risk missing the boat and losing our deposit. The cancellation fee was substantial, but there was no alternative. "I'm sorry about the tour, Mom," I said, seeing her disappointment. "Maybe we can reschedule for later in the week." Mom patted my hand. "It's not your fault, dear. I'm more concerned about Melissa. This isn't responsible behavior." Dad paced the deck, alternating between calling Melissa and staring down the road as if he could make the car appear through sheer will. His mood shifted between worry and anger. "When she gets back, we're going to have a serious conversation about consideration for others," he muttered. My primary concern was Mom's medication. While she wasn't in immediate danger, I didn't like having her emergency supplies inaccessible. After some research on my phone, I discovered there was a small pharmacy in the town about 2 miles away. It might be possible to get a temporary emergency prescription filled if necessary. "I'm going to see about getting to town," I announced. We need to have backup insulin just in case. Dad looked ready to object, likely to suggest waiting longer for Melissa, but Mom nodded firmly. That's a good idea, Emma. Better safe than sorry. I found a water taxi service listed online that could pick us up from our dock and take us to the town marina. The cost was more than I wanted to spend, but this was about Mom's health. 20 minutes and a phone call later, a small motorboat pulled up to our dock, operated by a weathered local man who introduced himself as Ray. Need a lift to town, folks, he called. I helped Mom into the boat while explaining the situation to Ray. He was sympathetic and offered to wait while we visited the pharmacy, then bring us back to the cabin. The boat ride to town was beautiful despite the circumstances, with Ray pointing out local landmarks and a family of loons gliding across the water. At the pharmacy, I explained our situation and the pharmacist was understanding. Mom had her medical information stored in her phone, which helped expedite the process. While they couldn't provide a full replacement, they were able to give us enough emergency insulin to last the remainder of our vacation. The cost was high without our regular insurance coverage, but I paid without hesitation. Ray waited as promised and ferried us back to the cabin. As we approached our dock, I felt a mixture of relief about securing the medication and simmering frustration about the circumstances that had made it necessary. We returned to the cabin around 2:30 p.m. to find the car still missing and no sign of Melissa. Mom was beginning to look tired from the outing, so I helped her to the couch for a rest while Dad resumed his anxious pacing and phone calls. Finally, at nearly 4 p.m., we heard the sound of tires on gravel. Through the window, I saw our car pull up with Melissa at the wheel. She emerged looking relaxed and happy, wearing a new sun hat I hadn't seen before and carrying shopping bags. Dad met her at the door. "Where have you been?" he demanded, his voice tight with controlled anger. "We've been calling you for hours." Melissa looked genuinely surprised. "My phone died, and I forgot my charger. Did you need something? Did we need something?" I interjected, unable to contain myself. "We had a boat tour scheduled for today, the one we've been planning for weeks. You took the car without telling anyone with Mom's insulin in it." Melissa's expression shifted from surprise to defensive irritation. How was I supposed to know her insulin was in the car? And I thought the boat thing was tomorrow. "Even if it was tomorrow, you don't take our only vehicle without letting anyone know," Dad said. "We were worried about you, and we needed the car." Mom joined us, moving slowly from her rest on the couch. "Honey, my emergency medication was in the cooler in the trunk. We didn't know where you were or when you'd be back." For a brief moment, Melissa looked contrite. "I'm sorry about the insulin, Mom. I didn't know." Then, her expression brightened. "But look what I found in town." She held up her shopping bags. "The cutest boutique with local crafts. I bought you a handmade scarf, Mom." The swift change of subject was classic Melissa: deflect, distract, and charm her way out of accountability. Usually it worked, especially with Dad. But this time, the issue was too serious to gloss over with gifts. "Melissa," I said firmly, "we had to hire a water taxi to get to town so we could get emergency medication. We lost our deposit on the boat tour. This isn't about forgetting or your phone dying. It's about basic consideration for others, especially Mom's health needs." "You're overreacting as usual," Melissa snapped. "Mom is fine. Nothing happened." And I said I was sorry about the insulin, but how was I supposed to know it was in the car? "You should have asked before taking our only transportation," I insisted. "Or left a note. Or made sure your phone was charged. Any of those would have been the responsible thing to do." Dad stepped between us, his mediator role firmly in place. "All right, that's enough. What's done is done. Melissa, please be more thoughtful in the future. Emma, let's move past this. We still have most of the day ahead of us." I noticed he had barely chastised Melissa while asking me to drop the subject. The familiar pattern stung, especially given the seriousness of the situation. Mom, ever the peacemaker, suggested we all have a late lunch on the deck and enjoy the beautiful afternoon. The meal was strained, with Melissa chattering about her shopping discoveries and the charming local men who had given her recommendations for shops and restaurants. She barely acknowledged the worry and inconvenience she had caused, and by dessert, she had shifted the narrative entirely. She had done us a favor by discovering these local gems that weren't in any guidebook. After lunch, I found Mom in her room, sitting on the edge of the bed looking more tired than she had that morning. "Are you feeling okay?" I asked, instantly concerned. "Just a bit run down from all the excitement," she assured me, but I noticed she was checking her blood sugar again. The reading was higher than ideal, likely from the stress of the day. "Let me get you some water and your medication," I offered. As I helped Mom with her pills, a wave of protective anger washed over me. This vacation was supposed to help Mom relax and recover some strength, not add stress that affected her health. That evening, I stayed close to Mom, monitoring her condition discreetly. Her blood sugar eventually stabilized, but the incident had left me on high alert. As I helped prepare dinner in the kitchen, I could hear Melissa on the deck, talking and laughing on her phone, presumably with her new local friends. The sound grated on my nerves, but I focused on chopping vegetables with perhaps more force than necessary. Dad joined me in the kitchen. "Emma," he began awkwardly, "I know today didn't go as planned, but try not to be too hard on your sister. She's young and enjoying her vacation." "She's 33, Dad," I replied quietly, keeping my voice low so it wouldn't carry to the deck. "That's not young when it comes to basic responsibility and consideration for others. Mom could have had a serious issue today." Dad sighed. "I know, and I've spoken to her about it. But you know how she is. The more we push, the more she pushes back. Let's just try to salvage the rest of the vacation, okay?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak further without saying something I might regret. But as I continued preparing dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that a line had been crossed today, and that worse was yet to come. The fourth day of our vacation dawned overcast, with a hint of humidity that suggested possible afternoon thunderstorms. The weather matched my mood, heavy with unresolved tension from yesterday's events. Still, I was determined to make the most of our family time, especially for Mom's sake. I'd planned a picnic for today, knowing Mom enjoyed outdoor meals, but needed to avoid excessive exertion. There was a perfect spot just a short walk from our cabin. A grassy clearing with picnic tables overlooking a quiet cove. Close enough for Mom to manage easily, but scenic enough to feel special. By 9 a.m., I was in the kitchen preparing picnic foods, carefully including options that would work with Mom's dietary needs. Whole grain sandwiches with lean protein, fresh fruit, and homemade bean salad that was flavorful without being too high in sugar or salt. I also packed Mom's medication, extra water, and a small first aid kit. Yesterday's experience had reinforced my caution about being prepared. Dad emerged from the master bedroom around 9:30, kissing Mom's cheek as she followed him into the kitchen. "Something smells great," he commented, peering over my shoulder at the food preparation. "Picnic lunch," I explained. "I thought we could walk to that little cove we spotted on our first day. It's an easy walk for Mom, and the tables are in a shaded area." Mom smiled appreciatively. "That sounds lovely, Emma. What can I do to help?" I set her up with the simple task of wrapping the prepared sandwiches in wax paper while I finished the salads and packed the cooler. Dad volunteered to find the cabin's stash of picnic supplies, plates, utensils, and a tablecloth. Once again, there was no sign of Melissa as the morning progressed. After yesterday, I decided not to count on her participation in family activities, but Mom still knocked gently on her door around 10:15. "Melissa, honey? We're planning a picnic lunch if you'd like to join us." To my surprise, Melissa's door opened almost immediately. She was already dressed and groomed, checking her phone with one hand as she responded. "A picnic? Sure, I could do that. What time are we going?" Mom looked pleased. "We were thinking around 11 if that works for you." "Perfect," Melissa replied, her attention still partly on her phone. "That gives me time to finish answering these work emails." I felt a flicker of hope that today might proceed more smoothly than yesterday. Perhaps Melissa had reflected on her behavior and decided to be more engaged with the family. By 10:45, all the picnic preparations were complete, and we were ready to head out once Melissa joined us. At 11:05, Melissa finally emerged from her room. "Ready," she announced cheerfully. Then, glancing at her phone again, she added, "Oh, by the way, I hope it's okay. I invited a couple of people to join us. They're bringing some local craft beer they thought Dad might like to try." My hope for a peaceful family day deflated instantly. "You invited strangers to our family picnic? Without asking anyone?" Melissa rolled her eyes. "They're not strangers. They're the guys I met the other day, Jake and Troy. And Jake's sister Aubrey is coming too. They're locals who know all the best spots around here." Dad, predictably, seemed unbothered by the last-minute additions. "The more the merrier, right? And craft beer sounds great." Mom looked less certain, but nodded supportively. "Of course, it's fine. I'll just grab a few more plates." I bit my tongue and recalculated the food I'd prepared. It would stretch to accommodate 3 more people, but just barely. More concerning was the fact that Melissa had once again made a unilateral decision affecting all of us, without consultation or consideration. We set out for the picnic spot, me carrying the heavy cooler while Dad managed the picnic basket and folding chairs. Mom walked slowly but steadily, and Melissa strolled alongside her, chatting about the local attractions her new friends had recommended. The picnic area was as lovely as I remembered, a grassy clearing with sturdy wooden tables, shade trees, and a spectacular view of a quiet cove where the water was so clear you could see fish swimming near the shore. I set up our spot, spreading the tablecloth and arranging the food, while Dad helped Mom get comfortable in one of the chairs we'd brought. Melissa checked her phone. "They should be here any minute. They're coming by boat," said they'd dock at the small pier just down there. She pointed to a wooden dock extending into the cove about 50 yards from our picnic table. Sure enough, within minutes, we heard the sound of a motorboat approaching. A sleek craft pulled up to the dock, and 3 people disembarked, 2 men and a woman, all in their late 20s or early 30s. They waved enthusiastically when they spotted Melissa, who waved back with equal excitement. Introductions were made quickly. Jake was tall with sun-bleached hair and the deep tan of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. Troy was shorter but muscular, with a trimmed beard and multiple tattoos visible on his arms. Aubrey, Jake's sister, had the same blonde hair as her brother but styled in a short, fashionable cut. "So great to meet Melissa's family," Jake said, shaking Dad's hand firmly. "She's told us all about you." Troy held up a 6-pack of beer in brown bottles with handwritten labels. "Local brewery just started up last year. Best IPA in Maine, if you ask me." Dad looked delighted, immediately engaging Troy in conversation about brewing techniques. Mom smiled politely as Aubrey sat beside her, asking questions about our cabin and how we were enjoying our vacation. Melissa hovered between the groups, clearly pleased with herself for facilitating these connections. I busied myself setting out the food, trying to rearrange it to accommodate the additional people. As I worked, I overheard snippets of conversation. Jake was describing his work as a seasonal fishing guide, while Troy apparently managed vacation properties around the lake. Aubrey mentioned something about working remotely as a graphic designer. The picnic began pleasantly enough. The local beer was indeed excellent, according to Dad, who was soon deep in conversation with Troy about fishing spots. Mom seemed to be enjoying Aubrey's company, though I noticed she was eating less than usual, possibly self-conscious about her dietary restrictions with strangers present. Trouble began about 20 minutes into the meal when Jake, who had been watching Mom decline certain foods, asked bluntly, "Are you on some kind of special diet?" Melissa mentioned something about health issues. Mom looked uncomfortable with the direct question. "Just managing diabetes," she said quietly. "Nothing to worry about." "My uncle had diabetes," Jake continued, seemingly oblivious to Mom's discomfort. "Lost a foot to it eventually. Nasty disease." Mom's face paled, and I intervened quickly. "We manage it very carefully," I said firmly. "Mom's doing great with her treatment plan." But Jake wasn't finished. "You should try this natural supplement my uncle started taking. Really helped with his blood sugar. I can get you some while you're here. My buddy sells it." "That's very kind," Mom replied diplomatically, "but I prefer to stick with my doctor's recommendations." Jake shrugged. "Suit yourself," But these pharmaceutical companies just want to keep you sick and dependent on their drugs. The natural stuff works better and doesn't have all those side effects. I felt a surge of protective anger. This stranger was giving dangerous medical advice to my mother within minutes of meeting her. Before I could respond, however, Melissa jumped in. Jake owns a health food store in town, she explained, as if that qualified him to give medical advice. He knows a lot about alternative treatments. The conversation shifted as Troy produced a flask of what he called homemade moonshine and began pouring small amounts into plastic cups. Dad accepted one, as did Melissa and Aubrey. Mom and I declined politely. As the afternoon progressed, the dynamic became increasingly uncomfortable. Jake, Troy, and Aubrey consumed most of the beer they'd brought plus the moonshine, growing louder and more overbearing. Melissa matched their drinking, giggling at their jokes and seeming to forget we were there except when she wanted to involve us in their stories. "Tell them about that time you stole your dad's car in high school, Mel," Troy encouraged, using a nickname I'd never heard anyone call my sister. Melissa launched into a story I'd never heard before about apparently taking Dad's car without permission when she was 16 and going to a party. The way she told it made it sound like a hilarious adventure rather than dangerous and illegal behavior. Dad looked uncomfortable, possibly because he had no memory of this incident. "I don't remember that happening," he said when she finished. "Oh, you never knew." Melissa laughed. "I got the car back before you woke up. Mom caught me, but she never told you." Mom frowned. "Melissa, that's not. Remember how you made me promise never to do it again, and we kept it our little secret?" Melissa continued, cutting Mom off. "You were always covering for me." I watched Mom's face, seeing the hurt and confusion there. This story was clearly fabricated, but Melissa was rewriting our family history to impress her new friends. The final straw came when Troy and Jake began tossing a frisbee nearby, becoming increasingly reckless as the alcohol affected their coordination. A wild throw from Troy sent the frisbee crashing onto our table, knocking over drinks and sending food to the ground. "Sorry about that," Troy called, not sounding particularly sorry. Neither he nor Jake made any move to help clean up the mess. As I scrambled to salvage what I could of our picnic, I noticed Mom looking pale and tired. I discreetly checked her blood sugar and found it lower than it should be. She needed to eat something substantial soon. "Mom, are you feeling okay?" I asked quietly. She nodded but admitted, "I'm a bit tired, and I should probably eat something more substantial than these snacks." I turned to the group. "I think we should head back to the cabin. Mom needs to rest." Melissa frowned. "We just got here. It's barely been 2 hours." "Your mom's not looking great," Aubrey commented, more observant than her brother and friend. "Maybe you should take her back." Jake waved dismissively. "She's fine. Just give her one of those granola bars." The casual dismissal of Mom's health needs by this stranger was the last straw. I stood up, my voice firm. "We're going back now. Mom needs proper food and rest." Melissa looked embarrassed. "Emma, stop being so dramatic." "Mom, are you really not feeling well, or is Emma overreacting as usual?" Mom, never one to create conflict, hesitated. "I am a bit tired," she admitted. "But you can stay if you want, Melissa. Dad can help me back." "Actually," I said, looking pointedly at the mess on the table and ground, "I think we should all go. The picnic is pretty much ruined anyway." Melissa glared at me but was interrupted by Troy before she could respond. "Hey, no worries. Why don't we all head back to your cabin? We can bring the boat around to your dock. Got plenty more beer on board." Alarm bells rang in my head. The last thing Mom needed was 3 intoxicated strangers invading our cabin. "That's not necessary," I said firmly. "We have plans for the evening." "No, we don't," Melissa contradicted. "That's a great idea, Troy. You guys can come see our awesome cabin and hang out on the deck." Dad looked torn, glancing between Mom's tired face and Melissa's excited one. To my surprise, he sided with me. "I think today isn't the best day for more company. Your mother needs to rest." Melissa's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Fine. But I'm staying with my friends. I'll catch a ride with them. The walk back to the cabin was tense and silent. Dad supported Mom, who was moving more slowly than usual. I carried our picnic supplies, leaving nothing behind despite Troy's assurance that they would clean up later. Once we reached the cabin, I immediately prepared a proper meal for Mom and made sure she took her medication. While Dad helped Mom settle in for a rest, I cleaned up the remaining picnic supplies, my frustration building with every sticky container and wadded napkin. We had planned a simple family picnic, and Melissa had turned it into a chaotic social event with strangers who disrespected our mother's health condition. Around 6 p.m., I heard the sound of a boat approaching our dock. Looking out the window, I saw the same motorboat from earlier, now carrying Melissa, Jake, Troy, and Aubrey. They were laughing loudly as they climbed onto our dock, clearly more intoxicated than they had been at the picnic. Dad came to stand beside me at the window. "Looks like Melissa brought her friends back anyway," he observed, his tone unreadable. "Dad, Mom needs quiet to rest. These people were disrespectful about her health, and they're clearly drunk. We can't have them here." Dad sighed. "Let me talk to Melissa." He went out to the dock while I stayed by the window, watching. I could see Dad speaking to Melissa, who responded with animated gestures that suggested disagreement. After a minute, Dad turned to Jake and said something that made the other man shrug. Then, to my dismay, Dad seemed to relent, gesturing toward the cabin in what looked like an invitation. Minutes later, the whole group trooped onto our deck, Melissa leading the way with a triumphant expression. Dad followed, looking resigned. Troy carried more beer, and Jake had a portable speaker already blaring music. "Mom's trying to rest," I said as they entered, keeping my voice level with effort. "We'll keep it down," Melissa promised, though the volume of her voice belied her words. "We're just going to hang out on the deck. You don't have to join us if you're going to be a buzzkill." The next hour was excruciating. From the kitchen, where I prepared a light dinner for the family, I could hear the increasing volume of music, laughter, and conversation from the deck. Mom emerged from the bedroom, looking troubled by the noise, but unwilling to complain. When Aubrey came inside to use the bathroom, she paused by the kitchen. "Your sister is something else," she commented. "She told us you guys are loaded, said your dad owns some big company back home." I stared at her in confusion. "That's not true. My dad is a high school science teacher." Aubrey looked surprised.
"Oh."
"She said you guys own multiple vacation homes and were thinking of buying property up here." The realization that Melissa was lying to impress these people added another layer to my frustration. When Aubrey rejoined the group outside, I heard Troy's voice carrying through the open deck door. "So, when are you going to cook that fancy dinner you promised us, Mel?" "I'm starving." Melissa's reply was clearly audible. "Emma will make something for everyone. She loves playing house mother. It's her whole personality." That was when I reached my breaking point. I walked onto the deck, where the four of them were lounging with drinks, while Dad sat uncomfortably at the edge of the group. "Melissa," I said, my voice tight with controlled anger, "can I speak with you inside, please?" She rolled her eyes dramatically for her friend's benefit. "Whatever it is, just say it here."
"Fine," he replied.
"I'm not cooking dinner for your friends. In fact, I think they should leave. Mom isn't feeling well. Their noise is disturbing her rest, and frankly, they've been disrespectful since they arrived." Jake sat up straighter. "Whoa, that's harsh. We're just having a good time." At our family cabin, during our family vacation, while my mother, who has health issues, is trying to rest, I pointed out, "Melissa invited you without consulting anyone, and you've overstayed your welcome." Melissa jumped to her feet. "You don't get to decide who's welcome here. This is Dad's cabin rental, not yours." Dad cleared his throat. "Actually, Emma has a point. It is getting late, and your mother needs quiet." Melissa's face flushed with anger. "You're taking her side? After I finally made some friends who could show us the best parts of this place?" Troy stood up, swaying slightly. "No worries. We can tell when we're not wanted. Come on, Mel, grab your stuff. You can crash at my place tonight." That suggestion created an entirely new problem. "Melissa, You are not going to a stranger's house to crash after drinking all day, I said firmly. I'm 33 years old. You don't get to tell me what to do. Melissa shouted, loud enough that I was certain Mom could hear from inside. Dad finally took a stand. Melissa, you're staying here tonight. Your friends need to leave. What followed was an ugly scene. Melissa alternated between arguing and pleading while her friends gathered their things with obvious annoyance. Jake muttered something about uptight family as he collected his speaker. Troy tried to convince Melissa to leave with them one more time, but Dad physically stepped between them, his teacher's authority finally making an appearance. After they departed, Melissa stormed to her room and slammed the door. Dad slumped into a deck chair, looking exhausted. I went inside to check on Mom, finding her sitting at the kitchen table with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry about all that, I said, sitting beside her and taking her hand. This isn't how I imagined our family vacation, she said softly. I just wanted us all to spend time together and enjoy each other's company. As I comforted Mom, the weight of the past 4 days settled heavily on me. The pattern was clear. Melissa would continue to prioritize her own desires over family needs. Dad would enable her until pushed to the absolute limit, and Mom and I would be expected to accommodate and forgive without complaint. But for the first time, I was questioning whether I wanted to participate in this dynamic any longer. The morning of our 5th day at the lake dawned gray and drizzly, the weather matching the mood inside the cabin. Mom and Dad were having coffee at the kitchen table when I emerged from my room, their conversation stopping abruptly as I entered. Melissa's door remained firmly closed. Good morning, I said, pouring myself coffee and joining them. How are you feeling today, Mom? Better after a full night's rest, she replied with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The strain of yesterday's events was visible in the slight slump of her shoulders. Dad cleared his throat. I was thinking we could drive to that lighthouse today, the one in the guidebook. The rain is supposed to clear by noon. I nodded, appreciating his attempt to salvage something of our vacation. That sounds nice. The views are supposed to be spectacular, and they have a small museum about the area's maritime history. The tentative peace was shattered when Melissa finally emerged around 10 a.m., looking hungover but defiant. She poured coffee and leaned against the counter rather than joining us at the table. Morning, she said flatly. What's the plan for today? Dad explained the lighthouse idea, his tone carefully neutral. Melissa listened, sipping her coffee, then said, Actually, I made other plans. Jake and Troy are picking me up at noon. They're taking me to this hidden beach that only locals know about. The same people who had been asked to leave just last night were now expected to be welcomed back. I exchanged a glance with Dad, who looked troubled but hesitant to create more conflict. Melissa, Mom began gently, we'd really like to do something as a family today. We've barely spent any time all together on this trip. We've been together plenty, Melissa countered. I'm allowed to have some fun on my vacation too, you know. Of course you are, Dad said placatingly. But after yesterday what? Melissa interrupted. After Emma was rude to my friends and embarrassed me? After you kicked them out like they were criminals instead of people just trying to show us a good time? Dad's placating approach clearly wasn't working, so I decided to be more direct. After they disrespected Mom's health needs, drank excessively on our property, and left us to clean up their mess, I said. Those people aren't friends, Melissa. You met them 3 days ago. Melissa rolled her eyes. Here we go again with Saint Emma, the guardian of all things proper and responsible. Some of us actually know how to have fun and make connections with new people. This isn't about fun, I replied, struggling to keep my voice level. It's about respect for the family and consideration for Mom's needs. We came here for a family vacation, and you've spent most of it avoiding us or bringing strangers into our space. Oh, please, Melissa scoffed. Mom is fine. You're just being controlling, as usual. Dad intervened. Let's all calm down. Melissa, we would really appreciate it if you join us for the lighthouse today. Your friends can wait until tomorrow. Melissa hesitated, possibly because the request came from Dad rather than me. For a moment, I thought she might agree. Then her phone chimed with a text message. She checked it, and her expression hardened. They're already on their way. I can't cancel now. Yes, you can, I said. You can text them back and explain that you're spending the day with your family. I don't want to, Melissa shot back. I want to go to this beach with people who are actually fun to be around. Mom's soft voice cut through the tension. Melissa, honey, I've been looking forward to the lighthouse. I thought we could take some family photos there. The hurt in her voice was unmistakable. For a brief moment, Melissa looked conflicted. Then she squared her shoulders. I'm sorry, Mom, but I already committed to this. They're bringing a picnic and everything. I'll do the lighthouse thing with you another day. There won't be another day, I pointed out. We're leaving in 2 days, and tomorrow is supposed to be stormy. Well, that's not my fault, is it? Melissa retorted. Maybe you should have planned better. The unfairness of that statement, when I had done all the planning for this trip, was the final straw. Years of built-up resentment and frustration broke through my usual restraint. I did plan, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to control it. I planned this entire vacation while you did nothing. I researched activities that would work for Mom's health needs. I packed her medications and monitored her condition. I made restaurant reservations and scheduled tours. I even packed special foods that she can eat safely. Melissa looked taken aback by my outburst, but quickly recovered. Nobody asked you to do all that. You just like controlling everything. No, I countered, years of unspoken thoughts finally finding voice. I do it because someone has to be responsible, and it's never going to be you, is it? Not when you were 16 and Dad had to pick you up from parties where you were drunk. Not when you were 22 and Mom and Dad had to pay off your credit card debt. And not now at 33 when you can't even be bothered to show up on time for family activities. Emma, Dad warned, but I was beyond stopping. Do you have any idea what Mom's been through this year with her health? Do you know how scared she was when she was hospitalized in March? Of course you don't, because you sent flowers instead of visiting, then called for 5 minutes before you had to rush to a party. Melissa's face flushed. That's not fair. I live in Boston. I can't just drop everything every time Mom has a health issue. I live an hour further away than you do, I pointed out. But I managed to be there. I always manage to be there, because that's what family does. So I'm not family now? Melissa's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. You're family when it's convenient for you, I replied. When you need money, or a place to stay, or someone to listen to your latest drama. But when the family needs you, when Mom needs you, you're nowhere to be found. Melissa turned to our parents, tears welling in her eyes, tears I recognized as her go-to tactic when confronted with uncomfortable truths. Are you going to let her talk to me like this? Dad looked deeply uncomfortable. Emma, that's enough. Your sister. No, it's not enough, I interrupted, something I rarely did with my father. For years, we've all tiptoed around Melissa's feelings while ignoring everyone else's. We make excuses for her selfishness. We clean up her messes. We rearrange our lives to accommodate her whims. And what has it gotten us? A family vacation where Mom's health is jeopardized, Dad's stressed, and I'm treated like a servant expected to cook and clean for Melissa's random friends. Mom's quiet voice broke through my tirade. Emma, please. I'm sorry, Mom, but it needs to be said. I continued, gentler now. I love all of you, but this dynamic isn't healthy for anyone. Melissa needs to hear that her actions affect others, especially you. Melissa's tears had turned to rage. You think you're so perfect, don't you? The responsible daughter, the good one. Well, guess what? Everyone is sick of your controlling, judgmental attitude. You don't get to dictate how I live my life or spend my vacation. No, I don't, I agreed. But when your choices directly impact Mom's health and well-being, that's where I draw the line. Mom is fine, Melissa shouted. Stop using her health as an excuse to control everything. At that, Mom herself stood up. I am not fine, she said with unusual firmness. I haven't been fine for months. My blood sugar has been all over the place, I'm constantly tired, and I worry about every bite of food I put in my mouth. This vacation was supposed to be a chance for me to relax and enjoy my family, but instead, I've been stressed and anxious since we arrived. Melissa stared at Mom, momentarily speechless. Dad placed a hand on Mom's shoulder, but she gently shrugged it off. Diane, he began, using her name in that special way reserved for serious moments. No, Richard, Mom said. I need to say this. I love both my daughters equally, but Emma is right about one thing. This vacation has become all about managing Melissa's needs and moods rather than enjoying our time together. Melissa's face crumpled. So you're taking her side? After everything I've done to make this vacation fun? What exactly have you done? I asked incredulously. Name one thing you've contributed to this vacation besides stress and drama. I found this place. Melissa shot back. This was my idea. Finding a cabin online and then doing absolutely nothing to make it happen doesn't count as a contribution, I retorted. Dad paid for it, I booked it, researched activities, packed supplies. You ruined it is what you did. Melissa shouted. You've turned what should have been a fun family vacation into a military operation with your schedules and rules and judgment. You've made everyone miserable with your controlling behavior. Dad finally found his voice. Melissa, that's enough. Emma has worked very hard to make this vacation pleasant for everyone, especially your mother. Melissa turned on him, shocked to find him not automatically taking her side. So, you're against me too now? Perfect Emma has you all brainwashed. No one is against you, Mom said tiredly. We just want you to consider how your actions affect others. My actions? Melissa's voice rose to a near scream. What about her? She jabbed a finger at me. She's the one who embarrassed me in front of my friends. She's the one who treats me like I'm incompetent. She's the one who's ruined this entire vacation with her stick-up-her-ass attitude. The cabin fell silent after her outburst. Dad looked stunned. Mom had tears streaming down her face, and I felt a strange sense of calm clarity descending over me. In that moment, I realized that nothing would change. This pattern was too deeply entrenched, too comfortable for everyone despite the dysfunction. Melissa would continue to be selfish. Dad would continue to enable her. Mom would continue to make peace, and I would continue to pick up the pieces, unless I chose a different path. I'm leaving, I said quietly. What? Mom looked alarmed. Not right now, I clarified. But tomorrow morning I'm going to drive back home. I'll come back to pick you all up at the end of the rental period if you want, or Dad can drive you back. But I can't do this anymore. You're abandoning the family vacation because you didn't get your way? Melissa said incredulously. Talk about childish. I'm removing myself from a situation that's become toxic and unproductive, I corrected her. I came here hoping for quality time with my family, especially Mom. Instead, I've spent the entire time managing crises, being criticized, and watching Mom get increasingly stressed rather than rested. That's not a vacation. It's an extension of the caretaking role I already fulfill at home. Emma, please, Dad started, but I held up a hand. I've made my decision, Dad. I'll help with dinner tonight and breakfast tomorrow, then I'm going to drive back. I have work to catch up on anyway. You can't leave, Mom said, her voice breaking. We need you here. Those words, which would normally have swayed me instantly, now strengthened my resolve. That's exactly the problem, Mom. Everyone here has grown so accustomed to needing me that my own needs have become invisible. I need rest too. I need appreciation. I need to be seen as more than just the reliable one who will always sacrifice herself for everyone else. Melissa wasn't finished. This is so typical, she spat. You set yourself up as the martyr, then blame everyone else when you're unhappy with the role you chose. I didn't choose this role, I replied calmly. It was assigned to me while you were assigned the role of the special one who gets endless passes for bad behavior. But I'm choosing now to step away from it, at least for a few days.
Fine.
Leave, Melissa shouted. You've ruined our vacation anyway with your constant criticism and judgment. Dad finally lost his patience. Melissa, that's enough. Emma has done nothing but try to make this vacation work for everyone, especially your mother. If anyone has ruined things, it's... He cut himself off, but the implication was clear. Melissa gasped, genuinely shocked to hear her father come so close to blaming her. "I can't believe this," she said, her voice suddenly small. "My entire family is turned against me." "No one is turned against you," I said wearily. "We just want you to grow up and think about someone besides yourself for once." The sound of a boat motor approaching our dock broke the tense silence that followed. Melissa's phone chimed with a text message. "That's Jake and Troy," she said, her voice cold. "I'm going with them. Don't wait up." "Melissa, please," Mom called as she headed for the door. "Stay and talk this through." "There's nothing to talk about," Melissa replied without turning around. "Emma has made her feelings clear, and apparently you all agree with her. I know when I'm not wanted." With that dramatic exit line, she stormed out of the cabin. Through the window, I could see her hurrying down to the dock where the now familiar motorboat was waiting. Jake waved enthusiastically, unaware of the family drama he was intersecting. After Melissa departed, the cabin fell into a heavy silence. Mom sank back into her chair, looking utterly drained. Dad paced the living room, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of frustration I'd rarely seen from him. "I'll make some fresh coffee," I said, needing something practical to do with my hands. As I measured the grounds and filled the reservoir with water, Dad came to stand in the kitchen doorway. "Did you mean what you said about leaving tomorrow?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak further without my voice breaking. "I'm sorry, Emma," he said, the words coming out haltingly as if he wasn't accustomed to saying them to me. "I didn't realize how much pressure you've been under." "It's not just this vacation," I replied, keeping my eyes on the coffee maker. "It's been our family dynamic for as long as I can remember." I just reached my breaking point. Mom joined us in the kitchen, her eyes red-rimmed but dry now. "I should have seen it," she said softly. "I've leaned on you so much, especially since my diagnosis. It wasn't fair." "I don't mind helping, Mom," I assured her. "I love you, and I want to support you. What I mind is that it's always assumed I'll handle everything while Melissa gets a free pass to do whatever she wants." Mom reached for my hand. "I never meant to make you feel taken for granted." "I know you didn't," I said, squeezing her hand. "But that's what happened, and I need some space to figure out what comes next." The lighthouse trip was quietly abandoned as the three of us spent the afternoon in a strange, subdued state. I prepared a simple dinner, which we ate mostly in silence. The absence of Melissa's usual chatter and drama felt oddly conspicuous, like a missing tooth your tongue keeps finding. As I was cleaning up after dinner, Dad approached me hesitantly. "Are you sure about leaving tomorrow?" I nodded. "I need to. For me." "What should I tell Melissa?" The question irritated me. Still worried about Melissa's feelings even now, but I kept my tone neutral. "Tell her the truth. That I needed some space after our argument." Dad nodded, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "I've made a lot of mistakes with you girls," he admitted. "I thought I was being a good father by keeping the peace, but I was really just enabling bad patterns." The acknowledgement, however late in coming, meant something. "It's not too late to change those patterns, Dad." That night, I packed my belongings methodically, leaving out only what I'd need in the morning. As I folded clothes and organized my toiletries, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. The decision to leave early was painful but necessary, a declaration of my own worth and needs that had been a long time coming. I went to bed early but lay awake for hours, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the lake at night and wondering if I was doing the right thing. Around midnight, I heard the distant sound of a boat motor, Melissa returning, presumably. There were no voices or door slams, just the quiet click of her bedroom door closing. Morning came with pale sunlight filtering through my window. I dressed quickly and carried my bags to the car before joining my parents in the kitchen for final breakfast. Melissa's door remained closed. "I made your favorite blueberry pancakes," Mom said, her smile brave but her eyes sad. "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched by the gesture. We ate together, making stilted small talk about the weather and my drive home. As I was helping clear the dishes, Melissa's door finally opened. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking subdued. "You're really leaving?" she asked, her voice lacking its usual edge. "Yes," I replied simply. "I think it's for the best." She nodded, not meeting my eyes. Safe drive. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't an attack either. From Melissa, it was almost conciliatory. The goodbyes were emotional but restrained. Mom hugged me tightly, whispering, "Call me when you arrive safely." Dad's embrace was awkward but heartfelt. Melissa hung back, offering only a stiff nod. As I drove away from the cabin, watching it recede in my rearview mirror, I felt a strange sense of both loss and liberation. For the first time in my adult life, I had chosen my own needs over family expectations. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to travel on my own terms. The small inn I found about 30 miles from our family cabin was nothing special, a standard roadside establishment with clean rooms and a view of pine trees rather than the lake. But it offered something I desperately needed: space to think. After checking in and carrying my single suitcase to the room, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the emotions I'd been controlling wash over me. Tears came, hot and fast, a release of tension and grief for the family vacation that should have been, for the relationship with my sister I'd never had, for the years of feeling invisible despite always being needed. When the wave subsided, I took a long shower, ordered a pizza from the only delivery place in the area, and spent the evening watching mindless television. The simplicity was healing in its own way, no schedule to maintain, no one's needs to anticipate, no tension to navigate. I called Mom as promised to let her know I'd arrived safely. The conversation was brief, but gentle, both of us carefully avoiding mention of Melissa or the argument. "Get some rest," Mom said before hanging up. "You deserve it." The next day, I slept later than I had in years, waking naturally around 9:30 a.m. without an alarm. After a leisurely breakfast at the inn's modest restaurant, I spent the morning catching up on work emails from my room. It wasn't exactly a vacation activity, but it felt productive and normal in a way the cabin experience hadn't. In the afternoon, I drove to a nearby state park and hiked alone, setting my own pace without worrying about accommodating anyone else. The solitude was refreshing rather than lonely. As I stood on a small overlook, watching a hawk circle lazily in the clear blue sky, I realized how rarely I experienced this kind of unstructured freedom. The ability to go where I wanted, when I wanted, answering only to myself. That evening, my phone rang with Mom's number. I answered immediately, a reflexive spike of worry cutting through my newfound peace. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Yes and no," Mom replied, her voice strained. "I had a bit of a blood sugar issue this afternoon. Nothing too serious, but I was pretty shaky for a while."
Concern flooded me.
"What happened? Did you take your medication? Where was Dad? Is there a doctor nearby you can see?" "Emma, breathe," Mom said gently. "I'm fine now." My blood sugar dropped suddenly, probably from the stress of everything, to be honest. "Your father helped me get some juice and crackers, and I stabilized." I wanted to hear your voice. The admission touched me deeply. "I'm glad you called. How are things otherwise?" Mom sighed. "Quiet. Your father took the boat out fishing." "Melissa?" "Well, Melissa has been gone most of the day with those friends of hers." My jaw tightened. "Even after what happened? After your health scare?" "She doesn't know about it," Mom admitted. "She left before it happened, and we haven't seen her since." The old anger flared, but I tamped it down. "Mom, maybe you should come join me at this inn. It's not fancy, but it's comfortable, and I could take care of you properly." There was a pause before Mom responded. "That's very sweet, but I think I need to stay and see this through with your sister. Running away won't solve the underlying issues." Her words, though not intended as such, felt like a gentle rebuke of my own decision to leave. "I didn't run away," I said, more defensively than I intended. "I removed myself from a toxic situation." "Of course you did, honey," Mom said quickly. "And you were right to do it. I didn't mean to imply otherwise." We talked a while longer, Mom filling me in on Dad's fishing success and the family of loons they'd spotted near the dock that morning. By the time we hung up, I felt both better for having talked to her and unsettled by the news of her health episode. The next morning, I woke early and found myself packing my bags without having consciously made the decision to return to the cabin. Something in Mom's voice the night before had triggered my protective instincts. Despite my determination to prioritize my own needs, I couldn't ignore the possibility that Mom might need me. I checked out of the inn and pointed my car back toward the lake, telling myself I was just going to check on Mom and could always leave again if the situation remained unchanged. The drive felt shorter this time, familiarity making the route seem more direct. As I pulled into the cabin's gravel driveway, I was surprised to see only Dad's SUV present. Melissa's rental car was nowhere in sight. I parked and sat for a moment, gathering my thoughts before heading inside. Dad answered my knock, surprise evident on his face. "Emma, we weren't expecting you back. I was worried about Mom after her blood sugar incident," I explained. "Is she okay?" Dad stepped back to let me in. "She's better today. The doctor said it was likely a combination of stress and missing a meal." I stopped in the doorway. "Doctor? You took her to a doctor?" Dad nodded. "I insisted after she nearly fainted yesterday. There's a medical center in town, the same one you researched before we came. They were very helpful." The fact that Dad had taken charge of the situation and followed through on getting Mom medical attention was unexpected but heartening. "Where is she now?" "Resting in the bedroom. The doctor recommended taking it easy today." Dad hesitated, then added, "She'll be happy to see you." I carried my bag inside and went directly to the master bedroom. Mom was propped up against pillows, reading a novel. Her face brightened when she saw me. "Emma, what a wonderful surprise." I sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand. "I was worried after our call yesterday. How are you feeling?" "Much better," she assured me. "Your father has been very attentive. And the doctor was wonderful. She adjusted my medication slightly, which seems to be helping." I glanced around the cabin. "Where's Melissa?" Mom's expression clouded slightly. "She didn't come home last night. She texted your father this morning to say she was staying with her friend Aubrey." The information didn't surprise me, but it still stung to know that Melissa had essentially abandoned the family in the middle of a health crisis. "Has she asked about you at all?" Mom shook her head. "I don't think your father told her I wasn't feeling well. He didn't want to worry her or give her the opportunity to demonstrate whether she would care enough to come back. I thought but didn't say. Instead, I asked, "Have you eaten lunch yet? I can make you something." "Your father brought me soup a little while ago," Mom said, then added with a small smile, "It was from a can, but he heated it perfectly." The image of my father, who rarely ventured into cooking territory, carefully preparing canned soup for my mother brought an unexpected lump to my throat. Perhaps my departure had forced some necessary changes in the family dynamic already. I spent the afternoon keeping Mom company, catching her up on my brief solo adventure and listening to her stories about Dad's fishing exploits. She seemed genuinely more relaxed than she had been earlier in the vacation, despite her recent health scare. "I had a good talk with your father after you left," she confided when Dad stepped out to buy more ice. I told him some hard truths about how I felt enabling Melissa all these years. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was necessary. "How did he take it?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Better than I expected," Mom admitted. "I think seeing you stand up for yourself shocked him into reconsidering some things. He admitted he's been unfair to you and far too permissive with Melissa." The acknowledgement was validating, even secondhand. "Do you think anything will actually change?" Mom squeezed my hand. "Change doesn't happen overnight, especially with patterns as old as these. But I believe we've taken the first steps." Early evening brought the sound of a car in the driveway. Looking out the window, I saw Melissa's rental. She entered the cabin alone, stopping short when she saw me sitting with Mom in the living room. "You're back," she said, her tone unreadable. "Mom had a health scare yesterday," I replied, not bothering to soften the information. "Her blood sugar dropped dangerously low. Dad had to take her to a doctor." Melissa paled visibly.
"What?"
"Why didn't anyone call me? Would you have answered?" I asked. Or were you too busy with your new friends to care about your family? Emma, Mom warned gently. Melissa's expression cycled rapidly through shock, guilt, and defensiveness. I would have come back if I'd known, she insisted. Is she okay? Are you okay, Mom? I'm fine now, Mom assured her. Just tired. The doctor adjusted my medication. Melissa approached hesitantly and perched on the arm of the couch near Mom. I'm sorry I wasn't here. The apology seemed genuine, which caught me off guard. I had expected more defensiveness, more deflection of responsibility. Mom patted Melissa's hand. You're here now. Dad returned with the ice and groceries, pausing briefly when he saw Melissa, but offering a neutral greeting. The four of us existed in an awkward truce for the remainder of the evening, everyone careful with their words, the recent conflicts hovering unspoken in the air between us. After dinner, which I prepared while Dad insisted on handling the dishes, Melissa approached me on the deck, where I'd gone for some fresh air. I didn't know Mom was sick, she said without preamble. I would have come back. I believe you, I replied, surprising myself with the realization that I did. Melissa could be selfish and thoughtless, but she loved Mom in her own way. Melissa leaned against the railing, looking out at the lake. I've been thinking about what you said, about me never taking responsibility, always expecting everyone to accommodate me. I stayed silent, giving her space to continue. I'm not good at being reliable, she admitted. Not like you. It's easier to be the fun one, the spontaneous one. No one expects anything from me except entertainment. That's not entirely true, I said. Mom and Dad expect you to be an adult who considers others, especially when it comes to Mom's health. And I expect you to be a sister who sees me as a person with needs, not just a convenient resource to handle whatever you don't want to deal with. Melissa nodded slowly. I can see how I've been taking advantage. Not intentionally, but the result is the same. She turned to face me directly. I can't promise I'll suddenly become as responsible as you overnight. But I am sorry for how I've treated you, especially on this trip. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was more self-awareness than Melissa had ever demonstrated before. Thank you for saying that. So where do we go from here? She asked. One day at a time, I replied, starting with finishing this vacation with as little drama as possible for Mom's sake. The final 2 days of our family vacation passed in a state of cautious reconciliation. Melissa actually joined us for meals and activities, though she did slip away once to say goodbye to her lake friends. More significantly, she made an effort to help with Mom, offering to get her medications or asking if she needed anything before disappearing to her room. Dad, too, showed subtle but meaningful changes. He consulted me about activities suitable for Mom rather than automatically deferring to Melissa's preferences. He stepped up with practical tasks without being asked. And most importantly, he began to hold Melissa accountable for her commitments, giving her a pointed look when she was late for breakfast on our final day. On the morning of our departure, as we packed the cars and prepared for the journey home, Mom pulled me aside for a private moment.
Thank you, she said simply.
For what? For having the courage to speak your truth, even when it was painful. Sometimes a family needs a disruption to see the patterns they're trapped in. I hugged her tightly. I'm sorry I left you. Don't be, she insisted. That act of self-respect did more to change things than years of silent accommodation ever could. The drive home was split between the two cars, Dad and Mom in the SUV, Melissa and I in her rental. The arrangement, suggested by Dad, forced Melissa and me to spend several hours in close quarters, navigating conversation without the buffer of our parents. It was awkward at first, but gradually we found our way to more honest communication than we'd had in years. Melissa admitted feeling jealous of my closeness with Mom, especially since her health issues began. I confessed to resenting her freedom and the way she seemed exempt from family responsibilities. I've always admired how together you are, Melissa said at one point, surprising me. You make adulting look effortless. I laughed. Trust me, it's not. I'm constantly worried I'm doing it wrong. You? Worried about doing something wrong? I thought that was my department. The shared laughter felt like the beginning of something new, Not a complete resolution, but a crack in the wall that had grown between us over the years. Back home, the changes that began at the lake continued to unfold gradually. 3 months after our eventful vacation, we gathered for family dinner at Mom and Dad's house. Mom's health had stabilized with her adjusted medication, and she looked better than she had in months. The most remarkable change was in our family dynamic. Dad consulted me about important decisions rather than automatically deferring to Melissa. Mom was more forthright about her needs rather than trying to accommodate everyone else first. And Melissa, while still Melissa in many ways, made visible efforts to be more considerate, calling Mom regularly and even remembering Dad's birthday without a reminder. As for me, I discovered that speaking up for myself didn't cause the family to fall apart as I had feared. If anything, it strengthened us by replacing unhealthy patterns with more honest communication. I began setting clearer boundaries around my time and energy, and to my surprise, my family largely respected them. The vacation that I thought had been ruined turned out to be transformative in ways I never expected. By standing up for myself, even when it meant being cast as the villain temporarily, I had initiated necessary changes that benefited everyone. The pain and conflict had been worth it for the healthier family dynamic that emerged. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to love yourself enough to demand respect. That setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's essential for authentic relationships. And most importantly, that it's never too late to change family patterns that no longer serve anyone well. Our main vacation wasn't the idyllic experience I had planned, but it gave us something more valuable. A new understanding of each other and the courage to create healthier ways of being family. In the end, that was worth more than any perfect vacation could have been. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself with family, even when it made you temporarily the bad guy? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about family dynamics and personal growth. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is set a boundary with those you love the most. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you courage in your own family journey.